saying that innovation isn't good. We absolutely do, but I'm not going to call them geniuses. And Jack Bogle would certainly never have called himself a genius. But I think we do need innovators. There will undoubtedly be financial products that are actually good for one. You know, I'm not a fan of Bitcoin. I don't think, I don't recommend that any investor buy it. But will there be improvements in the payment system in the future? And will there be digital currencies in the future that are stable and that are useful, as opposed to something that goes up $1,000 or down $1,000 in a day? Absolutely. And there's room for much more innovation in finance. So I think there will be innovation, there should be innovation. I just wouldn't call
Jeg kommer ikke inn på min egen Discord. Hvordan det mulig?
Thank you so much.
Jeg trykker på live, jeg kommer ikke inn dit igjen.
Stay tuned, because next we have
Ja, dere trykker.
Far Out Genius.
Så jævlig rart.
Trykker på frontbroker. Kommer ikke inn. Live trading. Kommer ikke inn på min egen. Kommer ikke inn. Ja, jeg er ikke inne. Det er bare Robert som er der.
Jeg ser at han sitter...
Ja, jeg får ikke logget meg inn.
Skal dra frem PC-en, så ser han. Kanskje ser du. Får du på meldingen eller noe, eller bare går det ikke å trykke på den?
Jeg får ikke gjort. Skal jeg gå ut igjen? Logger jeg ut? Sånn. Så går jeg på den igjen. Trykker jeg på live trading. Får ikke logget meg på. Er jeg på nå? Ja. Hvorfor ser jeg ikke min der oppe da? Suppressed, står det. You do not have permission to speak in this channel, står det hos meg nå. Hvorfor skjer det da?
Ja, det skal vanligvis ikke skje, men jeg må ta og se på innstillingene her.
Ja, for det er noen som har vært idioter på meg da, som prøver å ha meg ute. Skjønner du nå, eller?
Jeg prøver å gå inn på brukeren din nå, han tar på seg.
Ja, men jeg er jo... Hæ?
Du har alle...
There is no one way to be a genius.
Ja, men jeg fikk jo ikke logget meg inn.
Dreamy and far out. You could be scrupulous and scientific. You could work within the institutional establishment, or you could honor indigenous wisdom. All of those descriptions apply to this.
Ja, nå er jeg inne.
Moraba Jah is a space environmentalist, an astrodynamicist, a spacecraft navigator, and the first African-American professor of aerospace engineering at the University of Texas. Last year, the MacArthur Foundation gave him a fellowship that is informally known as a Genius Grant. So, if you want, you could call him a genius, you could call him Professor Jah, but you'd rather you call him Moraba. So, Moraba, welcome. I really love the phrase, a stroke of genius. You were
Ja, skulle faen meg mangle.
with your family in a hotel one morning, and you were taking a shower, and you had this feeling and this
Jeg har det på speaker da, bare så vet det.
and you know whether or not it
Det er koselig.
anything at all to do with genius. Tell us about that moment.
You know, I'm in the shower, and I felt a presence. And in my mind's eye, I saw flashes of scenes from like history and
Jeg var bitte litt. Det gikk opp jævla mye, og gikk opp 400 poeng på grunn av Donald Trump gikk over kjeften sin. Så jeg satte en ny short der.
with the planet, but
Det
that
var fin å få den der midt I trynet, vel?
has
Fy
mostly
faen.
abandoned that intergenerational.
Så hadde et jævla godt poeng, faktisk. Hun sa det at for at Elon Musk leverte jo drittall. Og så sier Sahar da fikk han vel hjelp av gode kameraten sin, Donald Trump. Og det var akkurat det han gjorde. Akkurat det han gjorde.
Jeg skal gå ut og så si at han ikke sparker en mann han ikke har lov å sparke.
Ja, det er akkurat det som var litt av poenget mitt I stad, da. Han skal ikke sparke Power, han har ikke lov til å sparke Power, så hvorfor sa han det, liksom? Han sa det for at markedet skal gå opp på det, ikke sant? For det så helt katastrofe ut I stad.
Ja, men jeg tror det en safe short vi har oppi der, altså.
Hva sier du for noe?
Jeg tror det en safe short vi har oppi der, så.
Ja, det her bare støy. Altså,
Her kjent.
Det gæren, det bare støy. Tesla leverte 20% dårligere revenue, og guidingen fortsatt ikke noe spesielt bra. Og IMF nedgraderte hele verden. Så kommer den der oransje jævla maiskolben og bare «Åh, skal ikke sparke Power», så går det opp 400 poeng på det. Det bare tull. Bare ikke rot I virkeligheten engang. Bare, oi, forresten, jeg skal ikke sparke Power. Bare, du kompis, du har ikke lov til å sparke Power. Bare hold kjeften din. Du trenger ikke si det engang. Jævla kløne, ass. Men jeg bare shorter mer på vei ned. Jeg gikk ikke sette en svær short da, for du vet ikke hvordan markedet reagerer I natt, ikke sant?
Jeg har to hele.
Fikk du en rett hadde du mange, eller?
Jeg hadde, skal vi se, en hel, skal du si til sammen, ned på 1800. Og så det min, skal vi se. En 1845.
Ja, jævlig mange som...
Så 1,5 der, eller det 2 der?
Men de som kan litt business her nå, de setter en short her. Det kan jeg sitte her med en gang.
Jeg klaska inn short.
Bare retail. Hæ?
Jeg klaska inn 2 hele, det samme de startet opp her, og så klaska du inn en rett under meg der nå, og så tok jeg ut de 2 første, og så setter jeg en ny oppe for deg igjen.
Men nå kommer også marketmakerne til å kjøre dette alle hver da, på natta.
Ja da, men det ikke så mye å gjøre med det.
Ja, nei, så lenge du ikke...
Jeg kan ikke la være å skal du si ikke short den der.
Nei, sånn der... Det bare sånn krampestrekninger for å ikke få det til å krasje. Altså når IMF nedgraderer hele verden, at det da går opp 400 poeng på grunn av han kameraten sier at han ikke skal sparken til Powell, det så barnslig at det holder. Men jeg skjønner at folk blir nervøse, jeg skjønner at folk bare «Åh, faen, kjøp!» Jeg skjønner jo greia. Men det fordi de ikke skjønner hvordan verden fungerer, da blir det jo sånn da.
Men faen for noen amatører.
Det sånn markedet folk skjønner ikke noe.
Jo, men Trump og Hegseth og hele gjengen.
Ja,
amatører.
Alle de sa noe I dag etter at IMF nedgraderte hele fuckings verden.
My mom was born in Haiti and she was naturalized citizen. My father, Sierra Leone, naturalized citizen.
Sånn det. Dennis, har du fortsatt telefonen, eller?
Ja, jeg sitter her.
Han bør gå på Discorden, da. Eller hvis du ikke så legger deg, da.
Nei, ikke ennå, men jeg må bare gjøre meg litt ferdig.
9 days later, they found me in some apartment
Ja,
in the Bay Area, put me back on a plane to my mom. And my mom had, we had a cousin that lived in Caracas, and so we fled the country because my mom's like, I don't want your father to ever find
Jeg så til og med Apple gikk opp I stedet 6,5% på Trumperen.
I felt very isolated, I felt very alone. I came into contact in this void.
6% på ikke noe.
Like an ocean of infinite.
Jeg lover det kommer igjen.
Jeg synes det litt sånn funny, ja.
I can choose to meet my
En video opp 5,2, den burde gått mye mer egentlig. Broadcom opp 3,9, Taiwan Semiconductor, den kan gå mer, Oracle, blæ.
And make my healing be of service to others, and that's what I've chosen to do.
De går sikkert på grunn av Trump sa det at de ser for seg at det skal ordne seg med Kina. Det sikkert derfor det går.
Ja, han skulle få skjøtta ned I krigen og han så.
Ja, det skal gjøre den første døgn av vår president.
My inspiration for this comes from indigenous people, from traditional ecological knowledge.
Men hvis du skal resonere deg til hva som skjer nå, så det fortsatt 80% sjanse for at USA går I en ganske OK resesjon. IMF tok og nedgraderte hele verden I dag. Hele Europa foran et stort fall. ECB kutter renta forrige uke. Og du har revenue-fall på nesten 20% på Tesla. Nå kan du se at Tesla falt mye I forkant, men allikevel. Den gikk jo faen meg over 110% på 4 uker her for ikke så alt for lenge siden. Så både nedgradering av verden, dårlige tall fra Tesla, alt for høyt toll på kinesiske produkter som da basically, jeg vet ikke hvor mange prosenter det var av Apple, men det var ganske mye I hvert fall. Så du har de aksjene som får mest juling på tariffen opp mest nå. Så det her bare klovneri. Men det nå vi tjener penger, Robert, når alle gjør feil.
Ja.
Det da vi skal tjene cash.
Vi satser på det.
Ja, det går fint. Jeg bare synes det sprøtt at det gikk opp 400 poeng på Trump etter børs.
Ja.
Skal du sitte oppe natt, eller skal du legge deg etterpå, eller?
Ja, si det, du.
Du sitter som hver tredje, du. Hvorfor hjerteinfarkt?
Jeg skal på noe sånn arbeidsavklaring I morgen tidlig.
Hva for noe?
Jeg skal på noe sånn arbeidsavklaringsgreier I morgen tidlig.
Ja, såpass.
Men jeg kan godt se litt shabby ut når jeg kommer dit. Da.
Ja, jo verre du ser ut, jo bedre det.
Ja, ikke sant.
En uke med meg, Robert, så kommer du til å se som det faen meg har vært en ulykke. Mottagstrenget 5 energidrikker og massasje utover natta. Jeg blir trøtt av energidrikker, jeg blir ikke våknet av det med helt tatt. Jeg får bare gjøre rød nesa. Har du sett nesa med det? Den helt krise. Han har fått sånn araberskjegg også, så den der kontrasten med nesa og skjegget mitt helt kaos. Kan du forklare hva du har gjort på Crazy-kontoen med litt bra risk management? Hva du hadde gjort nå? Jeg hadde shortet dette her til helvete med 10 kontrakter. Alt jeg gjør på copy-kontoen hadde jeg gjort 10-gangeren med Crazy-kontoen. Det det som litt av greia med trading også, for det veldig mange som go with the flow, og det funker til en viss grad til du virkelig driter deg ut. Du må ha egne meninger I markedet, ellers kommer du aldri til å tjene mye penger. Du må vite hva som skjer, og så må du vite hvorfor det skjer. Hvis du vet hva som skjer og hvorfor det skjer, så det lettere å ta tap, og det lettere å holde gevinsten. Hvis du sitter I en posisjon hvor du ikke vet hva faen som skjer, så må du bare få nøkk. Det verste å gjøre trade som ikke du vet hva som skjer. Da skal du ligge helt unna. Da det bare bedre å ta tap og bare si fuck you.
We all have our own gifts. We all have our own limitations. When and how?
3-14 nå, dette med cirka 90 poenger nå.
So that's a complicated question, I would say, because I didn't so much realize. I realized I was special, but I became special through a process of training and stuff. If you look back on it, like I wouldn't say I popped.
Jeg har gjort armen med Erik, men mens det ramler 90 til.
A genius or something like that. It's like when
Hva sa du nå?
stop and look at me while I was dribbling or practicing at a court, people like.
Jeg sa at jeg går opp armen med Erik, mens det ramler 90 til.
Ja, tar en røyk.
So this cute little girl dribbling 2 balls and doing all this between like step backs into shots and stuff. So pretty early on, I realized that, yeah, I might be a little bit different than the average kid.
You won this like completely beloved national competition, but it's something that I think you no longer consider your main passion, or maybe you didn't even consider it your main passion then. What does basketball make you feel that spelling does?
I would say think basketball gives you even more of like the competitive rush. Like I just really love to compete and stuff. So like in like spelling, it's more like
Tapper?
it's not really like
Nei.
person competition.
Ja, den kommer til å gå minus og pluss helt av. Varierer helt av.
Ja, men det det jeg mener. Folk skjønner ikke, tror jeg.
Nei, men det sikkert derfor de ikke kjenner her.
Basketball is more like physical competition. Like, oh, I made a two legs and there's a girl on me and I have to shield her off. And it's like more tangible competition as opposed to the more philosophical competition of spelling.
I want to ask you about a very different kind of genius. There's this billionaire named Sam Bankman-Fried. Think you've heard of him?
Of course.
Widely considered to be the world's, great crypto genius before he was then charged with fraud, which he has denied. How should the rest of us look at people who get called geniuses, but maybe they still have shortcomings, just like everybody else?
Sometimes I feel like the term genius is like nowadays it's so loaded. Like maybe it's like, oh, it doesn't just mean, oh, look at her, she's a genius, like she's so smart or whatever. But like then like if you're labeled with that like your whole life, that kind of like puts a pressure on you. Like maybe once upon a time, like I listened to a podcast about something. I don't know him personally, so I can't speak for him. But hypothetically, like he's like his parents are like, oh my God, you're so smart. He goes to accelerated programs in school, and that's just putting pressure from a very early age. Like,
Ingen planer om å sparke Paul. Det fordi ikke du har lov til å sparke Paul. Din jævla idiot.
Maybe just a little bit of sympathy, just a little bit, because they are like
tallet boom for Tesla, det vet vi. Det 20%.
They've been considered geniuses their whole life, and they had a nice business plan or something, but then it didn't work out. And so what are they supposed to do? Go to all these people who say, oh, you're a genius. That just puts a little pressure on you.
Satan selv. Han heter Jonas Gahr Satan.
The murky waters of life.
The murky waters of life. I want to ask you one final question about pressure. I think that there is sometimes pressure in the United States, maybe everywhere. Pressure on really smart people, genius or otherwise,
Så der nå begynner renten å tikke oppover.
To like make a lot of money, to be successful. And like I guess I'm thinking specifically about the finance industry and mathematicians, but it's true of the business world. You're smart, go make money in business. Do you have a favorite company?
Dere som skal trade på natta nå, husk på det da, at marketmakerne nå kommer til å leke med dere. Og det kommer ikke til å være sånn veldig med volum. Så hvis dere sitter med en liten konto nå, så ikke gjør så jævla mye. Rentene begynner å tikke oppover nå. Det veldig negativt for markedet. Satt en nullfunksjon sitter med en kapital som 4000 over konto. Det sånn at det helt ok. Ja, den videoen plager meg selv, ass.
Zyla, you're going to cross the bridge, you're going to have a great time. I have had a great time talking to you.
Oi. Det er ikke noen nyhetskanal.
Or if we need geniuses.
Helt forferdelig nyhetskanal.
Når røyk og nikotinsug kommer snikende, kan Nicorette sugetabletter gi rask lindring. Med en frisk smak av frukt eller mint. Bli røyk- og nikotinfri med Nicorette.
Ta imot. Bedre nå?
Ja. Er du litt sulten, kan livet virke litt mer komplisert.
This is a pre-pandemic strategy that we accelerated post-pandemic through supply diversification, dual sourcing, vertical integration, advanced analytics, and local partnerships to ensure supply chain resilience and production stability. Having said that, we're not 100% insulated, and these tariff risks are higher on our low-volume platforms than the high-volume ones.
Yeah. In fact, there's no more vertically integrated car company than Tesla.
Tesla opp 9,7% etter at de har misset med 20% revenue. Det er ganske
mining iron and stuff. and growing rubber trees. So, like we're not growing rubber trees and mining iron yet.
Så 4,8% på pre-market de opp etter at de leverte århundrets dårligste resultater. Ja. Om jeg har brød? Nei.
Yeah, I think so. It's not but it's out with potential to be the biggest lithium refinery outside. Yeah. And we've got space to expand it if we need to build more. Right. So, and then we've got the cathode refinery in Austin, next to the Gigafactory. We're going to figure out what to do about the anode. That's an ongoing subject of discussion. The best of all possible worlds would be figuring out how to have no anode. Best anode, best part being no part. That's the dream of the lithium batteries, to be anode, not have an anode. But either way, we've got to have the anode, the cathode, and the lithium, and the electrolyte, and the separator to make a cell. But you know, there's no other car company that has built lithium refineries and cathode refineries. We're ridiculously vertically integrated, and thus our best position to protect against supply chain disruptions.
Yeah.
Right. Florian, you want to talk about the progress in the front?
Yeah, certainly for our in-house cells, we've multi-sourced every component, and we have every part coming from at least 2 different countries of origin, which is we started this, the supply chain team and the engineering team worked together on this for the last couple of years to put that together. It's not something we did in a couple of months. This is years of work. So we're in a good position to take advantage of that, and the insourcing of lithium and cathode, they're the 2 most critical parts of the battery. That's right in our backyard, and we're totally insulated from oil.
The operation.
That's the right in there.
We also make our own cells, by the way. So right. Cell production. If you look, there's you make the anode, the cathode, the lithium, the electrolyte separator, the can, and then you got to put all that together in the cell factory. And there are entire companies that all they do is produce cells, but they don't do the other stuff. They don't refine lithium or the cathode or So our cell production is going quite well, and I think we're currently sort of the lowest cost per kilowatt hour.
Yeah, in the US for all the cells we purchase in North America.
Yeah, so it's lowest cost of us. Yeah, so we have the lowest cost per kilowatt hour, all things considered. So the Tesla cell is the most competitive cell.
Hva sa du?
Yeah.
Hæ?
Hva sa du?
Sahar fikk sånn lavt blodsukker, så måtte gi noe sånn frukt.
Getting to lowest cost is it's the hardest challenge for the cell manufacturing.
Hæ?
It's relatively easy to build a flashy.
Fikk jo fruktdrikke da, og sjokolade.
So if you're kind of using that as base to then build the performance in different areas.
Hva er det du driver med nå? Hva er det du driver med nå?
Snakker med gründerdama. Influencer.
Yeah, I mean, to Elon's point, there's a lot of advantages for regionalization. The most important thing is we're not tying up working capital for 6 to 8 weeks on the ocean.
Elon Musk prater nå, da.
And everything that's in transit basically has to be scrapped. Secondly, port disruptions.
De jobber hardt nå.
Expensive because slight disconnects can shut down production. So then your production is costly to expedite.
Elon Musk prater, Trump skal ikke sparken til Powell, og han best, hva heter det for noe? Bessent sier at tollen må bli fikset opp i, så er det 3 stykker nå som sier alt de kan for å få det der opp da.
A disruption doesn't impact production while we stand up the regional manufacturing for that particular
And saying like on the rest of the info, like
Tesla fortsatt levert 20% dårligere
på revenue. In terms of casting, as we recycle those in melts, and there's the same thing with plastics, but it doesn't mean we're not exposed.
Og IMF har nedgradert hele verden i dag.
We do have some areas where we use rare earth magnets, and we've been working for years to find alternative sources and bring those up, as well as we have our induction machines, and as we've mentioned in the past, we're working on ferrite motors for some time. So as Colin said, with our heavy regionalization percentages, we're definitely like the lowest exposed to this, but we're not completely immune, as Pavel mentioned in his opening remarks.
Great. Similarly related, on the battery side, does Tesla still have a battery supply constraint, as noted on the Q4 call, and does that change tariffs?
So this is Karan. We've been working very hard to expand battery cell production in the U.S., both with vendors and what Bonnie mentioned earlier with the 4680 program. And we're also working on moving the upstream supply chain for battery cells to the United States for several years. And that strategy is really starting to pay off now. As it stands right now, we're not constrained on battery cell supply for vehicles. The recent tariffs do pose some challenges to Tesla Energy, like our CFO mentioned earlier, but it's something we've been anticipating and we should be able to resolve in a timely fashion. We actually have a plan in place and we're executing towards it. We also have some other sources coming online to supplement the shortfall, and then of course we have the LFP production in-house. We have a slight disconnect of aligning the right cells with the right packs, so that's the
Tesla opp fra i dag tidlig opp med 10,5% nå. Aftermarket opp med 5,7% på Tesla.
Did Tesla experience any meaningful changes in order inflow rate in Q1 relating to all of the rumors of brand damage?
So in Q1, as mentioned earlier, we took the best-selling car of the last 2 years and ramped up.
Tesla jo avhengig av Kina med tanke på batteriet.
Veldig rart, altså når de leverer så dårlige tall, og så skal det gå opp 20% på grunn av Donald Trump sier noe, det synes jeg veldig spesielt,
Men altså, de fullstendig avhengig av Kina for å få produsert de batteriene de skal ha.
And additionally, we had a record number of test drives globally in Q1 as well.
Ja, det ikke lenger for de produserer Tesla med dieselmotorer.
Nei, men jeg bare synes det fascinerende så at det kan gå så mye på så ræva tall. Jeg tror short-covering, jeg tror ikke det noen som tør å kjøpe det. Jeg nekter å tro det.
The macro demand for cars.
Altså, de leverte så ræva tall.
When there is economic uncertainty,
Fy faen, sitter og dekker inn shorta oppi der da, når det...
Ja, men du har ikke noe valg, du må gjøre det. Hvis du sitter ballferd, så må du bare gjøre det.
As far as absent macro issues, we don't see any reduction in demand.
Correct. And that's where we continue to focus on affordability, and it's the fundamental focus there.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you, guys. The next question is regarding the Tesla Optimus pilot line. Could you confirm if it is currently operational?
Her står det her, inntektene fra bilsalg stupte med 20%. Det helt psyko. Det så mye det. Og så den opp 10,6%.
Helt ordentlig.
Det garantert short-covering.
It's not a large volume production. That's why, this year, we'll make a few. We do expect to make thousands of Optimus.
Har du sett noe her, Robert? Trump, ingen planer om å sparke Powell.
Almost everything in Optimus is new.
Det må stå en parentes. Han har ikke lov uansett, men det står ikke der.
Nei.
Nei, Fed uavhengig. Trump kan si hva faen han vil, han får ikke sparket han. Og da gikk det opp på det.
Men altså, de uttalelsene de kommer med, de jo langt over grensa til markedsmanipulasjon. Og det faen ikke første gangen.
Nei, men nå det ganske ekstremt, for du så, jeg vet ikke om du fikk med deg fallet i går, du så det ble solgt sell-off i går.
Ja.
Og det begynte å komme tilbake til bear market i går. Det så ganske stygt ut i går. Og da måtte de si noe i dag. For ellers hadde de begynt å falle igjen, for det IMF nedgraderte i stad. Og at de nedgraderte i stad, pluss at det sa det er 80% sannsynlighet for at USA går i resesjon. Da kommer dollaren til å stupe. Trump kommer til å se ut som en jævla idiot. Så de måtte si noe i stad.
Ja, og dollaren at de behøver se 80-tallet.
Ja, det ser faen.
Det var
Men det som overrasker meg uansett er at Tesla går opp så mye på så ræva tall. Det synes jeg er helt sinnssykt, faktisk. Nå prater Elon nå da, direkte. Prater nå.
Then you want to try to make the motors as small as possible. And then, so we did design in permanent magnet.
Kan du høre at han prater?
Those were affected by the supply
Nei,
chain, by basically China requiring an export license to send out any rare earth magnets. So we're working through that with China. Hopefully we'll get a license to use the rare earth magnets. China wants some assurances that these are not used for military purposes, which obviously they're not. They're just going into a humanoid robot. So that's not a weapon system. But that is an example of a challenge there. But I'm confident we'll overcome these issues. And we'll, by the end of this year...
Stemmer, Ketil.
Great. Thank you very much. And the last question we already covered earlier, whether robotaxi was...
We're short up close.
So, with that, we can move on to analyst questions. The first question is going to come from Pierre at New Street. Pierre, please unmute yourself.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yeah.
That's great. So I'm super excited to hear robotaxi and Optimus becoming the very tangible future for Tesla. But I have
Han snakker om robotaxi, Elon Musk
nå. Not the legacy, but the current, like,
det er fint å slappe av jobb.
And when I look back at the ramp of Model 3,
jobber som taxisjåfør, eller?
I really saw it as being the iPhone of cars, a new product, completely reinvented, very different user experience, vastly superior, impossible to match for traditional competitors. And for the iPhone, it resulted in the...
Altså, det kommer ikke til å skje et selv mye nå, før klokka 2:30-ish.
And actually Apple taking 60%
ganske dødt frem til det.
And so when you look at the Model 3 and the Model Y today, I think they are still really vastly superior to any other cars. And I wonder why they've taken about 15% of their addressable market and not more, actually. So another way to put it is, why are there so many people still buying BMWs and Mercedes, knowing that the Model 3 and the Model Ys are out there and available? And I wonder if you're trying to solve that riddle internally, if you understand why.
Tesla pleier å gå opp på dårlige nyheter og ned på bra nyheter. Har skjedd utrolig mange ganger, gir ikke mening.
And if you have ideas of things you could do to address that, maybe there is enormous value left on the table there. Yeah, that's what...
RSI på over 70 kommer til å falle, bare la folk bruke hodet, tenker jeg. Ja, det nok det som kommer til å skje.
The reality is that in the future, most people are not going to buy cars. So it's kind of what, you know, one could sort of say, look, I think one to continue with your phone metaphor. I mean, you can remember the days of the flip phones when there was, 100 different flip phone designs. And I would, the mistake that manufacturers made was to try to make many different variants of a flip phone, which was a mistake. They should have made the iPhone. So, because obviously everyone's going to want a smartphone, but in the beginning of when the iPhone came out, I was like, wow, I can't believe these guys are not reacting as though this is death. But they didn't. They kept making variants of flip phones. Nokia, I think at one point was the most valuable company in the world, or close to it. But they kept making flip phones. Trying to find another market niche. Maybe somebody wants a phone of a different style. maybe this different color or whatever it is. Nope, they just want a super intelligent phone that can do everything. Just one. So, I said this many years ago. In the future, in the not too distant future, buying a gasoline car that is not autonomous will be like riding a horse while using a flip phone.
Han var svær før.
Some people still do it, but it's rare.
Great. Thank you. The next question comes from Emmanuel Rosner at Wolf. Emmanuel, please unmute yourself.
Great. Thanks for taking my question. So, Ilan, the public version of the FSD software still has a decent amount of, I guess, intermittent human interventions that are required. So what's still required for the software on your end to get to a level where it doesn't need to be supervised? And I'm asking that in the context of, obviously, the June launch being in the next couple of months. What still needs to happen?
And we are working on a number of items to improve the robustness. Yeah. I mean, we are aware of the interventions that are happening in the public bills, and that's why we are hardcore burning it down. And really just picking some initial launch city helps us focus on like solving all the issues that we face here. For example, like this focusing on Austin, we're not like solving all the issues that customers in Boston or somewhere else might face. And then here, we just like, have a big list of all the issues, just burn it down. And that's what the team is working on, along with other sort of like redundancy issues. For example, if one of the computers goes down right now in the customer fleet, it would like throw the red hands and ask you to take over, but we don't want that kind of situation. So you're solving both like the reliability issues of the autonomy software and also the reliability issues of the system software together for Austin.
Yeah, really we just worked through a long tail of unusual interventions. So, and these are really very rare. Like as I was saying earlier, you have an intervention every 10,000 miles. I mean, that's a lot of driving you got to do to even find one case where that happens.
Yeah, and some interventions are happening systematic, like missing functionality. For example, for handling emergency vehicles correctly, you don't need to consume audio as an input. But then the customer-facing versions don't have audio input, but the version that's in that's going to be in Austin will have audio input and so on.
Okay, but would you have like remote operators, for example?
I mean, every now and then, if a car gets stuck or something, someone will like unblock it. But it's just because we are a bit conservative and tend towards more safety than
69% av Lognas.
Now and then.
Bra, Ludvig. Ser du på IG, eller ser du på totalmarkedet da? Satt short der, faller gjennom natta til, så skal oppover i bunnen vare i natt. Det som litt sånn spesielt her nå da, at det opp på støy egentlig, så jeg vet ikke hvor mye det vil gå opp her, for det ikke noe hold i noen ting her, egentlig.
Simply unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you very much for the question. So I want to ask about the Optimus supply chain going forward. You mentioned, very fast ramp up. What do you envision that supply chain looking like? Is it going to require many more suppliers to be in the US now because of the tariffs? How does one kind of think about what needs to happen there?
I have to see how things settle out. I don't know yet. Right. I mean, so some things we're doing, as we already talked about, which is that we've already taken tremendous steps to localize our supply chain. We're more localized than any other manufacturer, and we have a lot of things underway that to increase the localization to reduce supply chain risk associated with geopolitical uncertainty.
Did you have a follow-up? Yeah. Wanted to come back actually to the robotaxi then. do you have a sense on how many cars or how big the scale will be initially and how that might ramp up? I know you're targeting millions of vehicles in the second half kind of next year, but initially at launch, how many vehicles would be reasonable, and is it going to be as simple as if one goes to Austin, let's say late June or July, you'll be able to request?
But the retail are long.
Yeah. We're still debating the exact number.
Så sannsynlig for at det faller veldig stor
akkurat nå. I don't know, maybe 10 or 20 vehicles on day one, and watch it carefully. They scale it up rapidly after that.
Du får litt sånn preg av Asia da, så vil det være, det ikke noe volum her oppe nå, så kan man flakse av.
Very close attention the first time this happens. But yeah, you'll be able to, end of June or July, just go to Austin and order a Tesla autonomous drive.
Great. The next question comes from George at Canaccord.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. It has to do with FSD pricing. Can we envision when you launch unsupervised FSD that there could be sort of a multi-tiered pricing approach to unsupervised versus supervised, similar to what you did with autopilot versus FSD in the past? Thank you. 5%?
This is something which we've been thinking about. I mean, just so you know, for people who have been trying FSD and who've been using FSD, they think even the current pricing is too cheap, because for $99, you're basically getting a personal show.
Yeah, I mean, we do need to give people more time to like, if they want to look at, like a key breakpoint is, can you read your text messages or not?
Yes.
Can you write a text message or not? Because obviously people are doing this, by the way, with autonomous cars all the time. And if you just go for a drive down the highway and you'll see people texting while driving, doing 80 miles an hour.
And putting the makeup on at the same time.
Yeah, putting on makeup, doing their hair with the mirror down, and texting and driving at 80 miles an hour. This is a common occurrence. So people eating lunch, you name it, shaving, anyway, but right now the car is very insistent that you pay attention to the road, so that, which reduces the value somewhat, because it's very rigorous about you paying attention to the road, and we'll gradually lighten up on that with every few weeks or every month we'll relax that a little bit, make it so you can be more and more able to do things you want to do, and not have the car demand your rigid attention. So that value, it'll really be profound when you can basically do whatever you want, including sleep, and then that $99 is going to seem like the best $99 you've ever spent in your life.
Great. And George, do you have a follow-up?
My follow-up is about geographic expansion. Just maybe discuss additional markets. There's been some news around India recently that you could launch this year and next. Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, we've been working on getting into India. India is a very hot market, and especially the current, and I don't want to talk just about tariffs, but the current tariff structure with India is that any car which we send in is subject to 70% tariff, also like a 30%, luxury tax on it. So, the same car which we're sending is like 100% more expensive than what it is. So that creates a lot of, anxiety. It's like, people feel, okay, they're paying too much for the car. And by the way, we're not getting the money. The local government is getting the money. And that's why we've been very careful, trying to figure out when is the right time. Like I said, we are working on it. It would be a great market to enter, because India has a big middle class, which we would want to tap in, and that is the market which we want to be in. But again, these kind of things create a little bit of tension, which we're trying to work around.
Great, thank you so much. The next question comes from Adam Jonas at Morgan Stanley. Go ahead, Adam. We can't hear you, Adam, so Minnie will put you back in the queue, and we'll move to Colin Langan from Wells Fargo while Adam figures out his audio. Colin, please unmute yourself.
Oh, great. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. You're still sticking with the vision-only approach. A lot of autonomous people still have a lot of concerns about, sun glare, fog, and dust. Any color on how you anticipate on getting around those issues? Because my understanding, it kind of blinds the camera when you get glare and stuff.
Actually, it does not blind the camera. We use an approach which is direct photon count. So when you see a processed image, so the image that goes from the sort of photon counter, so the silicon photon counter, that goes through a digital signal processor or image signal processor. That's normally what happens, and then then the image that you see looks all washed out, because if you point the camera at the sun, the post-processing of the photon counting washes things out. It actually adds noise. So quite a big breakthrough that we made some time ago was to go with direct photon counting and bypass the image signal processor. And then you can drive pretty much straight at the sun, and you can also see in what appears to be the blackest of night. And then, in fog we can see as well as people can, probably better, but I'd say probably slightly better than people, than the average person anyway. Yeah.
So the camera is able to see when there's direct glare on it. I'm a little surprised by that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then there were obviously media reports the other day that the affordable model was delayed. Doesn't sound like that's correct. Those reports also talked about it being more of a cheaper version of the Model Y. Any color on what we should expect? Is it a cheaper version of the Model Y, or is it actually going to be a design change with it?
So I think Lars already covered it in answering one of the say.com questions. The real thing which we are trying to focus on is affordability. And using our existing lines, there's always limitations when you're using existing lines as to how many different form factors can you bring to. So that's the way I would say you should think about it. And I don't know if Lars anything more to add.
Yeah, I think I said this before in other calls, with the recent upgrades to the Model 3 and Model Y platforms, we made some pretty great cars at pretty great prices, and we added a bunch of features and things like that. I think it's easy to consider that, moving forward, Tesla doesn't make bad cars, and we always make, our intent is not to make a car that is any worse than any car we've ever produced in the past. And so, the models that come out in the next months will be built on our lines and will resemble in form and shape the cars we currently make. And but the key is that they'll be affordable and you'll be able to buy one.
Great. We might have time for one last question. Adam, we'll try your audio again. You want to try to unmute yourself, Adam? All right. Unfortunately, still not working.
Sorry.
Oh, there you go.
Sorry, guys. Technology.
Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, in the February 28th Joe Rogan interview, Elon, you advocated for a ramp in tariffs to give people time to adjust. Otherwise, quote, you said the system would break and bad things would happen. So are things breaking yet? And if the tariffs as announced remain in place, when would things start breaking?
Well, at the risk of stating the obvious, I'm one of many advisors to the president. I'm not the president. So, but other people made their opinion clear to the president. He listens. He talks to many people, and he makes his decision. And I'm hopeful that the president will observe whether my predictions are more accurate than the predictions of others, and perhaps weigh my advice differently in the future. We shall see. I'm an advocate of predictable tariff structures, and generally I'm an advocate for free trade and lower tariffs. Now one does need to take a look at where if some country is doing something predatory with tariffs, or is providing extreme support for, if a government is providing extreme financial support for a particular industry, then you have to do something to counteract that. But I think that's on a case-by-case basis strategically. The president is the elected representative of the people, and is fully within his rights to do what he would like to do. So,
okay, Elon, I respect that. Just as a follow-up, and thanks again. Between China and the United States, who, in your opinion, is further ahead on the development of physical AI, specifically on humanoids, and also drones? I'd be interested. And is it even close? And kind of how? Serious. And,
well, I think the answer on drones.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, Naval, made this, posted on X. I reposted it. I think a prophetic statement, which is any country that cannot manufacture its own drones is doomed to be the vassal state of any country that can. And America cannot currently manufacture its own drones. But that's it, again. Fortunately. China, I believe, manufactures about 70% of all drones. And if you look at the total supply chain, China is almost 100% of drones have a supply chain dependency on China. So China is in a very strong position. Here in America, and we need to shift more of our people and resources to manufacturing, because this is. I have a lot of respect for China, because I think China is amazing, actually. But the United States does not have such a severe dependency on China for drones, and be unable to make them unless China gives us the parts, which is currently the situation. With respect to humanoid robots, I don't think there's any company in any country that can match Tesla. Tesla and SpaceX are number one. And then now I'm a little concerned that on the leaderboard, ranks 2 through 10 will be Chinese companies. But I'm confident that rank 1 will be Tesla.
Great. Well, I think that's unfortunately all the time we have for today. We appreciate all your questions and look forward to talking to you next quarter. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Nå ble Elon ferdig med å prate. Faen, man pratet non-stop I 2 timer.
And some of obviously the big picture was interesting in terms of Elon Musk's future, how he's going to be spending his time, but there were also some interesting sort of detailed questions there. What stood out to you?
Yeah, so first and foremost, starting off Musk.
Det ganske fantastisk at hele verden ble nedgradert av IMF I dag, og så gikk det faen meg opp på grunn av en uttalelse. Det helt sykt, faktisk.
Basically spending more time at Tesla.
Går opp ennå.
Jeg ser det. Tesla opp fra lowdag med 9,7 sånn nå. Hvis du går på frontbroker, på forsiden på frontbroker, så trykker du på market screener her nå. Så ser du hele pre- og aftermarket rønner kontinuerlig her. Så du vil se se om alt stengt. Det helt genialt. Hvis du går på forsiden på frontbroker.
Basically, Musk talking about how he's spending less time there in Washington, probably 1 to 2 days a week, potentially, and then returning back to Tesla, focusing more on that company, and we saw the stock move up accordingly on that. Secondly, Julius, more details on things like the cheap EVs. Talking about how they're focused more on cost.
Han sier også at han fokuserer mer på Tesla når han ferdig med Dodge.
To divulge that, they said it would resemble maybe existing product lines, sort of hinting that the Reuters report that it would be a stripped down Model Y is potentially what
det var ikke noe nytt.
By June or so, and also that they were on track with the auto.
Det ganske bra, så nå får man 10%. Det er ganske sjukt.
Because I'm in LA right now, and I see hundreds of Waymo cars everywhere, so Tesla needs to really catch up in that regard.
Lurer på mye han hadde gått til, så han har levert bra tall, hvis den går opp 10% på ræva tall.
That was really interesting on the affordable car auction too. We heard Jessica Caldwell of
Or gått ned.
The car wasn't that different, that it might not be that appealing to consumers, even at a lower price point, but I guess we'll see about that. On the Waymo and autonomous driving front, I thought some of their sort of vague or non-answers to some of the questions were really fascinating. Just to give one example, they were asked how many people, remote operators, would be involved in the process of robotaxis in that pilot in Austin. And we had an analyst on the show earlier who said Waymo does use people behind the scenes. But they didn't, the Tesla folks on the call didn't really answer that question. Or what did you hear from that?
Yeah, it was a little cagey. They said, yes, we'll have some people there, possibly remotely, who would control a car if it was stuck somewhere. But then they said that's them being conservative, as if they didn't really want to do that, right? But you're absolutely right. A lot of these companies like Waymo do have these remote operators that will fix cars who are stuck. It's just part of trying to have another set of eyes, more safety, fixing situations, that hairy situations that happen with these cars. And yeah, we're not getting the details like how many operators are going to be, how many cars will be on the road, what's the stage planning for Austin, and then what's happening in California. Very few details. Again, we keep wanting for more details, and they keep saying, give us time, wait till midsummer, give us time.
They said 10 to 20 vehicles in Austin at first, and then we'll see.
Yeah.
Hey, Pras, I think you just hit it on the head. There was no clarity out of this. More questions than answers. And one of the biggest questions we had was concerned with tariffs in China. And when he spoke about his relationship with Donald Trump, he said he was going to, kind of, for lack of better terms, fall in line. Did you get anything
på det lovet på Nasdaq var det på 17,750? Var det lovet der?
He's still very deferential to President Trump, talking about how he supports, the ramping up of tariffs if need be, but also that they're generally bad. We know reports were out of the White House were that he was actually advocating strongly for no tariffs at all. So I think he was just trying to give deference to Trump, but you could kind of read between the lines that he's not a supporter of tariffs. Tesla, is a very localized manufacturer in the country, but they need parts of China, things like that.
870 poeng på at verden har blitt nedgradert i dag. Det ganske sjukt.
Trying to say, hey, we'll support the president, but this is really bad for a multinational companies with complex supply chains.
Pras, thank you so much for all your work on this today.
Ollie, tror du kommer til å gå oppover nå, gitt?
We want to bring in Yahoo Finance's Josh Schaefer now because obviously we have been very focused on Tesla. Stock initially didn't do much of anything, then went up, but we're also watching what's going on in the broader market because there we're seeing some action.
Yeah, Julie, so you're looking at futures.
Snakker vi short eller long per nå? I dag så har jeg gått alle veier. Det har vært short og long av hverandre. Nå er short.
100 up 1.9%, and then your futures tied to the Nasdaq 100 up over 2%. Kind of two key headlines from President Trump as he was speaking with reporters coming out earlier this afternoon. So President Trump called tariffs to China, quote, 145% is very high. It won't be that high. And then he also said that he does not intend
Har du short mange kontrakter, eller?
Take those two headlines. What do you think sort of driving the market here? Is it maybe not as high as we thought on China?
Du var vel I penger på det I stad før han åpnet kjeften sin, var det ikke det?
Hva sa du?
Du var I penger på det I stad før han begynte å prate, var det ikke det?
Skal se 1,5 på 0,3, 4,5 kontrakt.
Hvor mye har du på kontoen totalt da? 5,600. Det ikke vits å øke mer nå.
Nei.
So we listened to the call. I want to hear what the analysts have to say, their thoughts.
Nei, jeg ikke det nå, nei.
But right now, this rally
after hours se hva som skjer. Kan også kjøre en hedge også til å få summa seg litt. Bare se litt nå hva som skjer.
Ja, det skal det så forholdsvis høy oscillator da, så tror jeg sentimentet snur snart.
Se på Yilsen og Bonsen nå begynner å stige.
Thank you for watching. That's a wrap on Yahoo Finance's special coverage of Tesla's earnings call. Be sure to tune in tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern. You'll see what futures are doing then, and you'll get all your daily market coverage. Have a great night.
Hva tenker du target-sjef 1778 var day low? Hva skjer hvis Yilsen og Bonsen stiger? Det betyr at store gutta selger equities, og så kjøper de bonds. Så tipper at institutional driver nå også selger, og så har du retail som kjøper, og så får du et dropp antagelig. Eneste grunnen til vi går opp nå, det bare short-covering opp grunn av det som Trump sa i sted. Det gir null mening, det ikke noe grunn til å gå opp. Null grunn til å gå opp. Tesla opp 10% nå på å ha levert helt ræva tall. 20% dårligere enn ventet.
Det ikke utrolig.
Tesla? Ja. Tesla litt spesiell da. Den litt sånn skummel og short også. Jeg har sagt det før liksom. Det beste å bare kjøpe Tesla på dip egentlig. Og shorte Tesla jævla skummelt ass. Den litt sånn som krypto. Det sånn der overoptimistiske mennesker som ikke skjønner regnskap eller matematikk. De kjøper for de tror at det skal gå til himmelen liksom. Så vet de ikke hvorfor de kjøper. Så derfor så vil jeg aldri ha shortet Tesla.
Nei, det har ikke falt meg inn.
Ja, det mange også. Sissener også tapte jo som faen, mener jeg. Jeg tror han tok kjempebett på å shorte Tesla i fjor, og så gikk den bare i taket. Det var kanskje forfjor. Det jævla mange som har tatt penger på Tesla, ass.
Det vel det antagelig, ja.
Ja, for det som problemet med Tesla, at det vanskelig å regne hjem, ikke sant? For den blir priset til, det et bilselskap, men det jo egentlig et tech-selskap, ikke sant? Så som et bilselskap så det noe verdens dyreste selskap, men som et tech-selskap så kan det gå mye mer. Så det litt sånn skummel. Men uansett så har den levert drittall i dag. Det rart at den så mye opp. Nå har den opp 10,5%, så det sikkert short-covering. Sikkert mange som garantert.
Garrett, if I can nerd out with you for a hot second here, as we're thinking about full self-driving and some of the technological specs that go into that, they've faced criticism in the past from some customers, some investors, and technologists alike, who were trying to figure out, do they need to add more of a tandem approach and layer in LiDAR as well as some of the radar as backup versus just going off a camera-based system?
We don't think so, and we've been very impressed with
Kan den gå til 19 000?
Over the last few years.
Ja, jeg tror ikke den går dit nå. Det kommet kjempedårlig tall i dag.
And really ever since incorporating Nvidia's GPUs,
han kommer nok til å dette i løpet av morgendagen, tenker jeg.
Progress has really accelerated in terms of the quality of the product and capabilities. So Elon Musk has famously called LiDAR a fool's errand, and we don't see any scenario in which they would go back and say, you know,
jeg sier igjen, IMF nedgraderte hele verden i dag, så det jo ikke akkurat jævla bra.
On the vehicle. So we don't see that happening, and the significance of the Austin rollout, of course, is that we're already operating there with their LiDAR vehicles. So Tesla will be compared to the capabilities of Waymo's product.
I'm curious too about what you anticipate hearing on the call about the executive presence of Elon Musk. Dan Ives over at Wedbush saying this morning that Elon should step back from his work at Doge and focus on Tesla as the company faces a quote code red moment before reporting first quarter earnings. To what extent do you anticipate hearing more about how Elon Musk plans to spend his time amid the company's weak moment?
Yeah, we don't think there will be any update regarding that on the call, but
Hva 5% til 8 nivåer
his Doge responsibilities, that would be a big positive for the stock. In fact, a few weeks ago we saw when a rumor came out that that was coming, the stock very quickly jumped more than 10% intraday. So in fact, it was the same day that Tesla reported their Q1 deliveries. So I think, you know, that would be a big catalyst for the stock, and we actually don't think that's too far off. So
Jeg skjønner ikke hva du snakker om.
a lot of reports that could be coming, you know, by late May. So
hvor mye har han gått inn nå?
There's a lot more friction between
Har han skrevet det, eller det han har på konto?
Administration and you know, we wouldn't be surprised. That's another reason why, you know, why we would buy the stock here. You know, following this big sell-off, the stock has essentially done a round trip from where it was just prior to the election in mid-October, when it ran up to almost $480. It's back down to where it was just prior.
De halverer omtrent estimatene liksom på growth.
Profile here.
Garrett, I only got about 15 seconds here, but do you believe that there's been an erosion of some of the customers?
Du skal jo tryne på dette her.
Because of Musk's annexation.
Sånn normalt sett, hvis ikke Trump sier noe helt sinnssykt nå, så skal det falle på dette her.
Yeah, no question there's been some damage to the brand. And I think, you know, that was really reflected in the weak Q1 sales numbers. You know, the production lines were down across all the factories in Q1, so that had an impact. But I think
Dere som vil lese litt makro.
Investors are really looking for
Det der det verste som kan skje et verdensmarked. De tar ned veksten med helt hvor faen mange prosent det der da? Slasher den mot 30%, jo.
To what extent that carried through and is going to show up.
Det helt katastrofe.
Q2 sales number remains to be seen.
Jeg tror halvparten av de som kjøper det ikke har lest den nyheten. Går vi ut 18 Går vi under 18,550 så shorter jeg mer. Jeg bare ligger helt rolig her oppe. Hvordan oljen nå? Er du nervøs, Robert?
Nei, jeg satt og kikket på crude oil. Den nå opp I dag litt grann. Skal vi se, jeg opp 0,7.
Ja, se gass også rører på seg litt oppover.
Ja. OS6-en ned 2,73. OS6-en ned 2,73, altså den så rævkjøl.
Ja, men alt jo rævkjøl.
Ja.
Du vet at det hele europeiske økonomien har vært I dass, ikke sant?
Ja.
Eneste som holder indeksen oppe I Europa de 12 store, og så det forsvarsaksjene. That's it. Ellers så har hele Europa gått rett I dritten.
Altså, oljeservicesektoren, den priset til et nivå på 2001.
Ja, men den skal opp. Bare kjøpe den, bare sitte litt rolig, vente til du får et rekyl opp her.
Jeg surplus, jeg har kjøpt av Shelf, jeg har kjøpt av TGS, Transocean, jeg har Orgeo, jeg har Borr.
Du kommer nok til å gjøre en kule der, gitt.
Greit eksponert der, for å si det sånn.
Det er første som kommer til å gå.
Seismic kommer til å gå først.
Trader du på demo? Nei, jeg trader med ekte penger. Jeg sitter ikke oppe om natta og trader med demo, ass. Jeg ante høyere enn det, ass. Jeg skal kjenne at det blir vondt i magen, så det kalles å trade med live.
And if you think about how companies are trying to plan, that gives a signal to the rest of the industry of how they're doing. So I know Ann talked about how United gave two different potential
Det droppet noen, vi droppet noen av 50 poeng.
They're thinking about the scenarios. They want to give transparency as best they can. And they're
Jeg vet ikke, nå kikker jeg på Vixen.
Går Vixen opp, eller ned?
Nei, den går ned, vet du, på det oppe der.
Mini får se da. Ja, du får se etterpå.
Men har vi Vixen på frontbroker?
Ja, men finnene, jeg vet ikke om det ligger under en ETF eller hva for noe. Vi har alt på frontbroker, vi har absolutt alt der. Men tenker du inne på CFD-en eller på Tradesen?
Skal du si Vix dollar?
Jo, vi kan legge ned, du kan sette ned i morgen, og få alt der. Du tenker jo på plattformen, eller tenker du på screeneren her foran?
Nei, skal du si, skal vi trade den.
Ja, men den kan vi sette under i morgen. Vi har alt.
Ja.
Hvis ikke du finner den nå, skal vi ta og sette den i morgen. Jeg vet ikke om den går inn som ETF, eller om den går inn som en aksje. Den er jo basically en ETF, tror jeg.
Skal vi se, står ingenting på frontbroker. Nei, på CMC.
Nei, men da kan vi få lagt ned i morgen. Jeg er sikker for det er lite volum der. Vi har lagt inn de indeksene og de aksjene som har høyest volum.
Ja, riktig. Da kan det hende at det er for lite volum på den.
Ja, det er veldig mange som ikke gidder, og når det er lavt volum så får du ikke noe ut av det.
Nei, og så skal du si det er ingen som kjøper den. Altså, han går til en viss grad teknisk, men han er livsfarlig og short. For eksempel. Da kan du gå på noe skikkelig smeller, altså.
So the balance between margins and loyalty is going to be very critical. Again, because some of these tariffs are currently on a 90-day pause, I don't think we're going to have all of the answers.
Det er forward. Ja, den på CMC.
And if they do, it means that they are really resilient. They're very agile.
CMC?
And these two themes are also really important right now.
Ja, forward.
To know that a company has an agile strategy, it means that they've been really thinking about it, running simulations on how they can move things around.
Har du sett det der pop-upene som kommer på frontbroker? Det er ganske kule de nyhetene. Det er jævla på ballen på Forex. Hvis du bare tar og går på telefonen din, så bare trykker du på frontbroker, så trykker du på sånn startside på telefonen, så får du sånn pop-up news på ganske mye kult her.
Given everything that's going on in DC right now, what are you expecting to hear from these names? I mean, the same thing is if they have a diversified strategy. Are they agile enough? You have GE Aerospace reporting, you have Boeing reporting. I mean, these companies have large businesses, so maybe, you know, for Boeing specifically,
they have other issues they've got to resolve and answer for. But with the budget cuts, with the military spending in focus,
det er ikke nok.
Nei, men det bare la det rulle litt på sånn, så folk får litt hetta og skjønner ingenting. Og så
450 år i bruk.
Ja, det åpnet opp med 400 på en uke der.
Hva sa du?
Jeg tror det åpnet opp med nesten 400 poeng etter at han Trumperen pratet.
Ja, skal vi se det. 250 til han startet vel oppi der. Ja, nesten 400 poeng.
Det er helt sjukt. Nå skulle sparken til Pavel I går, I dag skal han ikke gjøre det. Selv om han ikke har lov til å gjøre det, så er det greit.
Ja, sparken I morgen I stedet.
Hvis armsleddet går litt opp, nå blir det fett.
Estimates have been coming down for a month, started by Delta's pre-announcement in the middle of March.
Trumperen sitter og venter på at vi skal selge shorten vår. Så blir nå sparken på det.
Their earnings estimates will be $7 to $9 a share. So, and that would be with
Dette er tullet. Det er tullete.
They're not sitting back. They're cutting.
Hvorfor er Apple opp 6% I dag, liksom? Det går mer opp på at man håper at Kina ikke skal kjøre opp tollen videre, eller tariffen. Det går mer opp på det enn når Apple leverte tall selv. Det jo spennende. Men det som litt sånn, det som litt greie her nå, at det ikke noe volum, ikke sant?
Ja, det klart. Det ikke.
Det null volum. Det så lite volum.
I would not, Simeon. Look, the one thing about United is that they've always been investing for growth. And so they're taking even more planes that are more efficient and allow for more premium seating. And that's where the money is made. And then the real distinguishing factor for Delta United, and to a lesser extent American, is their loyalty programs. That is a great competitive advantage. And that's going to add to earnings. These smaller regional airlines and the low-cost carriers are finding it more difficult to compete because they got smaller fleets, okay? And they're dependent also on Boeing delivering new planes or, you know, and some more competitive routes. And it's more difficult for them. So I think United's a standout. They've been investing aggressively for years, like in this fleet, and at times it's made people nervous. But at the end of the day, you know, it's always worked out for them. So that's why I don't think I would, you know, extrapolate this to the rest of the industry just yet.
Peter, you know, fuel costs have been coming down here United and the broader sector.
I mean, it has certainly helped. But the one thing about it is that it helps all the airlines equally. You know, nobody really has an advantage when it comes to that. I mean, Delta to a small degree in that they own a small refinery outside Philadelphia, but it doesn't offset the hedges or create that much of a hedge for them. It's just certainly allowing a cushion as revenues fall or revenue expectations fall with this demand weakness we've been seeing lately.
Has there been a change in the hedging protocol? Because we used to get surprised back in the day. The oil prices would come down, and then these guys would come out and say, well, we locked in for the next 18 months, so it doesn't make a darn bit of difference. Has that changed in the last, 10 years or so?
I mean, there's been less of it. I mean, look, oil's been fairly volatile in recent years. Insurance, right? And that insurance has gotten more expensive. The more levered companies, with weaker balance sheets have been forced at times to lock in those prices. But the world, it's not making that much of a difference.
Nå har han lagt ned feil. Nå må du få Nils å se på det. For det riktig på de her, som sitter nå her live. Alle sammen. Du har riktig prosenter du, Robert, når vi trener, ikke sant?
Jeg har dobbelt så mye som deg.
Jo, men det riktig, så hvis jeg kjører en trade, så får du samme opp, ikke sant?
Dobbelt så mye nesten.
Ja, for det dobbelt så mye penger. Ja, så det stemmer sånn prosentmessig.
Ja, det
Jeg tror det gutta dine til hva de gjør for noe, Alex.
It sounds like what we have here is just this tit for tat and a trade war, Peter. I'm just curious what you made that headline. What did you make that news? What did it mean for Boeing investors?
Boeing has 130 planes on order with China of the 6,400 in total in their unfilled backlog. It's not, that big of a deal on that news, just itself. And it's not like China can.
Kontoen rebalansert.
Airbus doesn't have a whole lot of planes sitting waiting either, but I think it's just kind of more noise when it comes to Boeing financially than anything else.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Peter, as always.
se her. Last 7 days, 5,11.
Jo, men få se.
Ja, men det du ser.
Jo, men jeg skal se på hva han har gjort for noe. For han har sikkert tatt feil innstilling.
Ja, men du får ikke sett det der.
Jo, for der står det 0,1.
Ja.
0,76. Han er på koppet, ikke sant? 0,01. Han har sikkert skrevet inn, når han har skrevet inn hvor mye han skal følge meg med, så har han sikkert skrevet inn et beløp.
800 000, nei 8000, nei $800. 8000 kroner.
Det tror jeg ikke gjort, du må dobbeltsjekke det. For det er ren automatikk.
Ja, han skal gjøre noe, han skal sende prints.
Sjekk, for det er noen som, Espen gjorde feil. Han skrev 150 da. Ja, så kom det, skjønte ingenting. Han trodde at det hele kontoen følger. Du må skrive en beløpet.
Ja, jeg vet det.
Ikke bare kontoen. Jeg tror det er mange som bommer der. Det er jævla enkelt. Det står jo hvor mye vil du følge meg med. Da må du skrive beløpet. Du, husk på at sa prøv å sove. Gå på kino. Jeg tror ikke vi skal ha en kamerat.
Når man legger inn... Ja.
Jeg tror ikke vi skal ha en kameraten på tech support. Hva sa for noe, Robert?
Jeg sier man legger inn beløp man følger det med, så man får man ikke lagt inn større beløp enn man har under equity.
Man får ikke lagt inn større beløp enn hva man selv har i equity, mener du?
Ja.
Men jeg tror han har gjort det feil. Jeg tror han har følt med for lite. Nei, jeg prøver å si det hele tiden. 10% på 1 million er mer enn 10% på 10 000. Det er samme prosent, men det er forskjellige beløp. Jeg vet ikke hvor mange jeg skal si det.
Which they cited, they attributed to Part D dynamics. This is the first quarter that the pharma industry is going to see some wins from...
Hørte han ene fyr som han bare, faen, han tjente bare et par hundre spenn, og så spørte han ene, hvor mye jeg puttet opp? Jeg puttet opp 1000 kroner. Så bare, hva for noe? Ja, vet du mye av det? Det er 10% det. Så bare, ja, men jeg puttet opp i 10 000 på noe krypto, der var jeg opp med 600 kroner. Og så sa vi til han kameraten, du vet at det er 6%. Hadde du puttet 10 000 opp i det her, så hadde du gjort 1000. Så det er ikke alt som kan prosenter. Da vet jeg ikke hva jeg skal si for meg. Da kan jeg ikke si så jævlig mye, egentlig.
Well, the short answer is not much, and I think it's still all very uncertain. I think we all have been waiting to see what the announcement for tariffs is. I think what's known, of course, is that the pharmaceutical industry is going to be tariffed the way semiconductors and autos and several other industries are. We've been waiting for this for a while. What we also know is that there has already been a Section 232 investigation that has been done.
Det var alle bare puttet inn 100.
Jeg orker ikke de gutta dine, for du må ha de mest dummeste folka under deg enn noen jeg har hørt. Nei. Han sitter og bruker halve kvelden din på piss, og så han puttet opp i 100 kroner.
Nei, ikke 100 kroner,
$100? Ja, hva faen tror han for da?
I stedet for, ja, men han visste jo ikke det da, ikke sant?
Nei, men han må slutte å si at ting er feil.
Ny plattform og...
Ja, det er greit, men han må slutte å si at det er feil. Hvis han har puttet opp i 1000 kroner, og tror han skal tjene like mye som meg som har en konto med 30 000, så har han jo skjønt jævla lite da. Jeg sa det til deg, du må snakke til dem så de skjønner at de må skrive beløpet. Vi må selv skrive mye med å satse. Putt opp i 1000 kroner!
Ja, men han hadde ikke visst det. Han visste ikke det.
Han skjønte at det var feil. Om det var feil?
Ja, han hadde jo mer på kontoen.
Jo, det er helt greit, og man kan gjøre feil, det er ikke noe problem, men ikke si at det er feil. Det her er jævla bulletproof. 10% av 10%, hvis da har han tjent 5% av 1000 kroner. Hva er det han tjent?
Da stemmer det. Da stemmer det. Med $12.
Ja, da stemmer det. Kanskje burde prøve litt mer. Men det du burde gjøre, du burde ha sånne regneark. Til gutta dine.
Nei, faen.
Du må ha et regneark hvor det står 10% er lik 10 000 kroner, så som jeg. 100 000 kroner, så som jeg. 150 000 kroner, så som jeg. 10% er samme prosent. Send det dem.
Det er greit.
Ja, det burde gjøre.
Nå har vi skjønt det.
Nei, jeg har sagt det til deg nå 3 dager. Jeg tror de drikker litt for mye tresprit i gutta dine. Eller er det den gulrotspriten?
Nei, det er gulrot.
Ja, fy faen, gulrotspriten er jævlig. Det stinker i bilen enda, altså. Jeg lurer på om det lekker av den posen. Jeg kødder ikke, det lukter så jævlig. Holdt på å spy, jeg. For det lå under den jorda, ikke sant? Den jorda var varm. Det ble varmt inne der. Og fy faen, det lukta. Har du lagt deg, Robert? Har du tatt kvelden? Skal jeg sitte her alene nå, det da? Ja, det skal.
Well, I think they've, you know, I don't know
exactly. Mange som har gjort det feil, da.
I think
putter det for eksempel bare for å prøve liksom med 1000 kroner, og så bare øker de på, putter de inn penger på kontoen etterpå, liksom.
But I think now they're back to,
man tror at de kopierer det, liksom.
Ja, du må i dem som skjønner greia.
So, with that in mind, as you think about what they're kind of classifying right now and what they're looking towards in this environment to really kind of pull the levers of their business that would best suit navigating what some of the other bank CEOs have talked about in foreseeable or considerable turbulence were the words that Jamie Dimon used when they reported earnings. How is Goldman positioned differently to navigate if they don't lean into such a heavy consumer product focus and instead rest on some of their laurels such as
kvantetrederen.
And how
Det
can that
bare
continue to
piss,
kind
da.
of buoy the ship in this near term?
I will close every position and profit.
Well, I think historically,
No matter how long it will take, this is the basic risk requirement. Did I miss long? Yes, but not in spot. Det er hva som kan forutse markedet kvantegreiene sine. Han klarte ikke å forutse de greiene her.
Things have obviously changed a lot in the last,
Han spådde Bitcoin et år i forveien nå.
or maybe the last 2 hours. But I think these are the types of companies. You know, Goldman is a good example of a company that will.
Jeg liker helst å spå markedet når det skjer.
But you know, I've adapted to the business that I'm in. It has changed over the years, and they'll do the same.
Hva er det han baserer den kvantegreiene på?
You know, recessions are not bad for them. Recoveries aren't bad for them if they manage it right. So I think you get back to sort of what do you want to buy in this environment?
Yeah.
You know, you buy well-run companies and let them figure it out. And let them do the
Guys,
hard work to
thank
get to the other
God
side.
we are buying spot positions, but my short position are in losses right now. But I'm not gonna fix them. I'm just going to wait until the beginning of May. Kødder du med meg? Hva er dette for noe, Alex?
Du burde hatt utedusj.
Ja.
Det burde faktisk. Du burde åpne taket etter å ha vært inne på boldbanen, så kan du dusje.
Det er dritsmart, men det er ikke jævla kaldt.
Nei, du kan få utedusj.
Well, I guess it's, it may be,
Det er ikke så mye greier.
the
Fy faen,
politically
mye
correct thing
rare
to do,
folk,
but I
ass, som
think
gjør mye rart her.
it's more than tariffs. It's, it's what's going to happen to the labor pool
Det er
in
helt
the United
greit
States, what's going to happen to
å
the
liksom,
M&A activity that he's going to
når liksom
see or
sier
be
du kan
allowed to do,
spå
let's say, in the
markedet
banking
med
industry or all the other
kvantealgoritmer,
industries that
liksom.
are
Faen, det er ute
sort
og
of
kjører,
being
ass.
deregulated. So there's a lot of other things happening that are unrelated to tariffs. Tariffs seems to be the thing that everybody's talking about now. But I think the issue now is
Han har kjøpt fartcoin. Prompecoin. Kødder du med meg, eller?
I'm not trying to be, the guy
Fartcoin USD.
Great, but I think the
Fartcoin.
and I think our job as PMs and as analysts to try to figure out.
Den var jævla strøken, da. Men det sånn som sikkert ruster, eller?
Nei, det utedusj.
Men med varmt vann, nå bør du legge inn varmtvannsgreier, da.
Ja, du må bare ha en...
Det har faen ikke jeg.
Jo, men du har med, det 90 kroner med den, og en liten varmtvannstank, så du setter eventuelt bak eller under, eller bygger inn eller et eller annet. Og så har du bare vann koblet til den varmtvannstanken.
Du trenger ikke å koble i huset?
Nei, det er jo ikke. Du kan bare koble rett i... Rett fra...
Skal vi kjøpe fartcoin?
Jeg har lyst til å lage en egen coin, jeg.
Hva da? Hvilken coin da? Don't know percentage coin?
Ja, for eksempel. Trump 2 coin.
Ja, Trump er morsom, ass.
Utedusj med soloppvarming.
Det er kult, da.
Ja. 4700.
Hva fin bil du sendte på.
Ja. Jeg kikket på TV, ute-TV.
Jeg så det.
Ja,
Jeg tror det går i dass, ass. Når det blir vinter.
30 minusgrader. Tålte TV.
30 minus?
30 minus.
Det blir jo som en snø, at det blir gravende.
Ja, du kan ha det enten innunder boblebadet, eller skal du ha det på veggene.
Boblebadet er dritfett, da.
Ja, det tålte var vanntett og alt sammen. Det var...
Inni den i... Det er ikke dårlig.
Nei. Hatt 2-3 setter sånn, eller et eller annet, sånn mindre da.
I taket der. Det var jævla kult, da.
Vice President of Equity Research
Bare med
at Wedbush
streaming
Securities.
til
Alicia, great to see you. So
Man kan
Netflix
streame, det var
earnings
kult.
on deck, Alicia. What are you telling clients? What should they expect?
Well,
we were a little concerned going into the quarter given the pretty significant price increases across the subscription.
Ikke future opp 600 poeng.
At the end of the quarter, we conducted our quarterly consumer survey, which showed that there was very little attrition.
Tesla opp 9,8%, var opp 10,5%.
Still intending to come back.
Apple opp 6%. Det er ikke noe som skjer her litt.
Our fourth quarter survey before the price increases had indicated quite a few people coming back to the service after not having it for a while. I think just on content, this last year, Netflix gained so many subscribers, 15% in the first half, 16% in the second half. And on that, the viewership didn't go up very meaningfully. I think that was just because of the lack of content. So when you see that content really becoming far more robust in 2025, and those price increases, that should keep a lot of those new subscribers and return subscribers on the service. I think overall, it's pretty positive, but we have to remember that Netflix isn't going to be giving us subscriber numbers or the average revenue per member, so it's going to be a little bit trickier to determine, where the stock is going to go once they report. But overall, I think it'll be positive.
Alicia, I'm so glad you just mentioned that because I can't help but feel when a company changes its metrics or stops reporting certain metrics, it's kind of like when a restaurant changes up its menu or when a company changes its name. What they're basically saying is something isn't going the way we'd like it and we need to reinvent. Am I being too harsh here?
I don't know if it's harsh, but I think what the reason that they're doing that is because in 2024 they were able to add so many subscribers because of the password sharing crackdown, and because of the subscription or the advertising tier, which was much lower cost. So it was a lot easier to keep those members on the service versus them churning out because they want to save a buck or two for a few months. So now, in 2025, they have a very different focus, and that is keeping subscribers on the service and raising price. And all their testing suggests that they could do this, that they could keep people on the service, and that's largely due to the content spend, the content quality becoming a lot more robust in 2025. After last year, we saw the SAG-AFTRA strikes that really impacted the quality of content available in the market. And Netflix is just so profitable. They have so much more money to put into that content versus their peers. So they're also adding live content like the WWE. And so they have a lot to offer, and I think they can raise the price, and our survey indicates that they saw little churn in the quarter because of that.
Alicia, I'm curious, if there was a material economic slowdown in the U.S., Alicia, what could that mean for Netflix?
Well, typically what we see, especially following the movies, is that people will cut travel, they'll cut expensive purchases, and they'll stay home a bit more. For Netflix, that's great. You know, the more people are home, the more they're going to seek in-home entertainment or perhaps going out to the movies. So that really benefits Netflix. On the other side, you know, they're trying to grow their advertising model, and if they don't have advertisers spending as much culling their budgets, that might impact the advertising tier growth for them and the revenue that they can derive from that.
Alicia, I'm curious, any new super hot hits coming out of Netflix? I think about Drive to Survive, which
Sitter det fortsatt? OK. Er det han som er support? Nei, han er ikke support.
I now go to F1 races. Is there a next super show that's coming up, or maybe even a couple of them?
Hvorfor er det på lørdag klokka 1:30?
Well, I think Netflix is.
Vi sitter og følger med, da.
See the benefit, not for Netflix, but for the movies in general. F1 coming out this summer, I think that's going to be a big hit. F1 is up for grabs, it sounds like, and there are a couple other sports properties that are up for grabs. So Netflix might get some, waves like purchasing some more sports content, some live content after the WWE. But just the content that's coming out right now, there are quite a few really good shows. Frankly, they have to compete with some other big properties out there like The Last of Us. But so far, they have some really good breadth and depth and live content quality. So it's really just the balance of that where they have something for everyone right now.
Alicia, final question here. Looking at the stock, it is up nearly 55% over the past 12 months. Alicia, how do you think about valuation for this one?
Yeah, the valuation is a little bit trickier now because they're not getting the subscriber numbers. And so it's just a basis of revenue growth capabilities, and they have to beat that revenue guidance by quite a large margin now, I think, because they're not getting subscribers. And what investors want to see is just expansion of that free cash flow. So if you're expanding that free cash flow pretty meaningfully, the shares could continue to go up. It's been a little bumpy through the beginning of the year because of these reasons, because people aren't sure as much what to expect. But I think they can continue to expand as long as that free cash flow continues to expand.
Alicia, great to have you.
Så hadde du ikke noe hint at jeg hatt fly som hus, liksom?
Ja, det var litt spesielt, da.
Ja.
Var det ikke det?
Howdy, y'all. I'm Elizabeth Gore. Welcome to The Big Idea from Yahoo Finance, the show that navigates the world of small business and entrepreneurship. All businesses start with one light bulb moment. And each week, I'm going to take you on a journey with America's entrepreneurs. As the co-founder of the small business funding platform, Hello Alice, it has always been my mission to ensure that entrepreneurs have the tools they need to live the American dream. So let's cowboy up.
Take a look at Constellation Brands, the stock under a bit of pressure this morning after issuing a weaker than expected outlook for fiscal 2026. The Modelo maker expecting to take a hit from President Trump's tariff policies. Joining us now, Bill Newlands, Constellation Brands CEO. Bill, great to have you on this morning. Talk to me about the 90-day pause that happened this week, because obviously the stock market was euphoric about it before a little bit of a give back. How are you navigating the implications of that 90-day pause and just the lack of clarity about what that's going to mean for your business? What are you doing right now?
Well, fortunately, we've been USMCA compliant from back in the first Trump administration. So we've had relatively little involvement relative to that. Our main involvement has been around the whole aluminum tariff. And then you have, obviously, the tariffs related to our wine business from both Italy and from New Zealand. We're trying to keep our focus on what we can control. And we don't control that issue. So our focus has been, let's continue to execute against our business. Our brand health remains world-class, particularly for our beer business, even though there's significant challenges with the Hispanic consumer. So we're really focusing our attention on doing what we can and controlling what we can.
Bill, good to see you. As always, you mentioned the challenges on the Hispanic consumer. Is that because of this administration's policy towards immigration?
Well, the consumer's concerned about a number of things. You know, we do a fair amount of research, Brian, as you would expect, on how the consumer sentiment is. And there's several areas. They're concerned about the pricing, costs of things, inflation. They're concerned about immigration, particularly consumers that have had friends or family who've been involved with issues around immigration. And how that's translating is that people are spending less. They're out less in restaurants. They're spending less on consumer goods and consumables. Fortunately, beer is pretty far down the list, but there's an overall concern in that community, less social gatherings. You know, people are getting together less. Those are beer moments. So for us, that creates a bit of a challenge that many of those scenarios and situations that normally would be consuming of our products are just not happening at the rate they have been.
To that end, Bill, you've spent, the company has spent billions the past few years building up their production capacity in Mexico. I believe you'll spend another, $2 billion building out a plant in Veracruz over the next 12 months. I think this administration would say, Bill, well, why didn't Bill Newlands invest those billions in the U.S. in making beer? Can you build a beer-making plant in the U.S. and make profitable beer doing so?
I think there's a couple of things, Brian, you have to keep in mind. First of all, while we're an American company, we're invested in Mexico because we are selling authentic Mexican brands. These are not brands in the same way that you're not making champagne in the United States, or you're not making tequila in the United States, or you're not making New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc in the United States. We're not going to be making Mexican beer in the United States. But don't forget, we have invested $1 billion a year for the last several years in the United States supporting our business. We support thousands and hundreds of thousands of jobs in the U.S. through Teamsters, through our distributors, through our retail network. Because, as you know, we've been one of the real growing companies in the CPG sector. Therefore, we do a lot in this particular market to support our business and to support the local economies.
Bill, I've been covering your company, I think, for 10 years. You and I have talked a lot. I've never hopped onto your earnings call and heard an analyst ask about the relationship with the Teamsters. Help us understand, are the Teamsters trying to pit American beer companies versus companies that produce in Mexico like yours? And what will that back and forth look like this summer? And do you think it impacts a company like yours?
I think the Teamster question was more of a localized issue. What probably wasn't recognized, although I do believe the National Teamsters now very much understand we brought a lot of new jobs to this country. Our distributors that carry our business have seen significant upticks in their business because of us, and many of those are Teamster jobs. So I think there's a lot of learning to be done about how companies like ours operate and the amount of business that we bring into the U.S. That doesn't even include the fact that many of our inputs, grains, corn, barley, come from the Mountain West of the U.S. and are then made into beer in Mexico. So we're really a company that understands both sides of the border. But I think that particular issue was very localized, and I think the overall national Teamsters recognize we brought a lot of jobs to this market.
No, good point, Bill. And seemingly every day I go into my Instagram account, Bill, and I see Hulk Hogan out there. He's out there hawking real American beer. Do you think that's what we're headed to? I mean, it's a U.S. versus rest of the world type of thing in the consumer packaged goods industry.
I think a couple of important things. Corona is the best loved beer in the United States, and Modelo is the #1 beer by dollars in the U.S. So our beers are very well received by U.S. consumers, and there's no beer of size that has the growth profile that Pacifico's had. It was up 16% last year. So we have brands that are very well received by U.S. consumers, and I hope it doesn't go into that sort of an angle because our brands have been very well received here in this country.
Bill, my sources tell me that they're shocked that more CEOs aren't talking about the negative impact of immigration policy on their bottom line. So I'm interested that you brought that up. And I wonder, in a hypothetical scenario where you have a line into the White House, which policy are you bringing up that you would like changed? Tariffs or immigration?
I think consistency is something that we're anxious to see. It's sometimes difficult to plan when you see varying things that occur over time. It also would be very good, in our judgment, to calm the Hispanic consumer down. Most people who are in this country legally have no issue, but there's a fair amount of fear. And I think it's important that consumers, for our perspective, that consumers are comfortable and that they're comfortable going out and shopping. As I said earlier, that's something they've cut back on significantly, going out to social gatherings, going to restaurants, and certainly for our business, those are occasions that are important for beer, and it would be important that those consumers get more comfortable.
And Bill, I talk to a lot of leaders that occupy your seat, the CEO seat, and they tell me they've never managed through something like this before. They've never seen it before. It's chaos. It's impacting how they're thinking about their longer-term operations. Have you had to manage through a situation like this before, and what has the past month been like for you?
I'd say the only thing that's been close to it was the initial COVID timeframe. Obviously, people changed their behavior quite a bit during COVID. And you're seeing some similar, although it plays out differently, but changes in consumer behavior that are sort of unprecedented. We've decided very carefully we're going to stay focused on what we can control, because some of the peripheral elements you just can't control. So we're trying hard. We want to win in the market. We're going to continue to support our brands at unprecedented levels. Fortunately, our brand health is good. So as the consumer gets more comfortable and comes around, we're going to be in a great position to continue the growth profile that we've had for the last several years.
Are you ready to master the markets and, dare I say, become a better leader in the process? Well, Yahoo Finance has you covered with our new full suite of original podcast content. Whether you're a seasoned investor or you're just starting your financial journey, we offer invaluable market insights and strategies to help boost your portfolio, build your wealth, and make you a successful investor. The podcast that will make you a smarter investor.
Welcome to Stocks in Translation. I'm your host, Jared Blickery. Welcome to Financial Freestyle.
Hi, I'm Bob Powell, and welcome to Decoding Retirement.
Welcome to Living Not So Fabulously.
Welcome to Trader Talk, the podcast that dishes out the market straight up.
Welcome to Yahoo Finance Sports Report.
Welcome to Word Money. I'm Patrick Murphy.
And I'm Dan Coons.
From Wall Street to Main Street to the C-Suite, we are your daily lifeline, because behind every great investor is Yahoo Finance. Join us on yahoofinance.com, the Yahoo Finance app, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Given today's economic uncertainty, what are some adjustments you can make to your retirement plan if you're in your 40s and 50s? Well, here to talk with me about that is Chris Littlefield. He is the president of Retirement Income Solutions at Principal. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here, and it will be a pleasure to have you answer the very first question I posed, which is, given today's economic landscape, the uncertainty that people are facing, what are some adjustments, the most impactful adjustments that people, especially in their 40s and 50s, who have some time to make adjustments, can start making with their retirement plan today?
Yeah, you know, I think obviously with the uncertainty, the market volatility, I think there's, you know, the people that have got a financial plan and should stick to their financial plan and not overreact to what's happening at the market at any particular time. For those who don't have them, they should get a plan. They should be working with somebody. And obviously there's lots of ways for people and Americans in the workplace to get advice. They can either speak to their employer, their retirement plan service provider, or they can also speak with an advisor. You know, I think, you know, everybody would benefit from some advice and holistic advice about how to address the needs that they have in retirement. But I think, you know, if you've got a good plan and you're saving regularly, I think the biggest mistake that I see people make is they try to market time. They either try to make adjustments in their asset allocations. And the challenge with that is there's two decisions that you make. It's one thing to sell, but you also have to figure out when to buy. And when people are making these decisions, if you're out of the market in the first couple of days after the market rebounds, you miss a very large percentage of the return. So if you've got a good asset allocation, you've got a good plan of savings, stay the course. Don't let the short-term news affect what is a long-term horizon. If you're in your 40s and your 50s, particularly if you're older than 50, take advantage of all the opportunities to save on a tax-free basis in your 401k plan and make sure that if you can afford to do so, make those catch-up contributions. There are significant opportunities for you once you achieve the age of 50 to save even more than the limits that are provided by the 401k plan. So, you know, I think it's just really important for people to have a plan, get some advice, because confidence is increased as they talk to somebody, and don't overreact to market volatility they may experience from time to time.
Yeah, so when you think about having a plan, I sometimes think that having an investment policy statement is the plan to have, especially when we talk about saving for or living in retirement. And I just went through this exercise. I serve on my town's retirement board. We manage $100 million. And we just yesterday approved our investment policy statement for this $100 million retirement plan. And what we have is an asset allocation, some in large cap stocks, some in mid cap, some in small cap, some in international, some in bonds and government bonds, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have bands around which we say we will rebalance if things get overweighted or underweighted. And, you know, do individuals need that kind of sophistication with their plan, investment policy statement that says this is how much I'll allocate to this sort of investment and this is when I'll rebalance given these limits I have on my asset allocation?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a best practice, but very few of us are equipped to do that on our own, right? But I think that's where the professional advice that you get in something like a target date fund provides exactly that. It allows you to have professional asset allocation, a rebalancing over time, and exposure to a lot of different asset classes. You can also get that through a managed account vehicle as well, which is a vehicle where you have somebody who's advising on the asset allocation and is helping you with the rebalancing. So do I think an individual needs it? Yes, ideally, but there have been innovations in the industry, particularly in the retirement space, like a target date fund that actually offer that in a very simple turnkey way that most people can connect with, as opposed to coming up with their own IPS or investment policy statement, figuring out what their weightings are, what their tolerance is, they have too much equities, not enough. A lot of that, most Americans, it just overwhelms them, and so it's easier to go into something like a target date fund that does that for them.
Yeah, I'm curious, Chris. I often think that for people in their 20s and 30s, where perhaps their finances aren't that complicated, the target date fund works perfectly fine. But maybe as you get into your 40s and 50s, a managed account may be the more appropriate solution. Maybe talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each approach and how you might transition from, say, target date funds to a managed account.
Yeah, and that's a great question, Bob. And sort of, you've seen some innovation in the industry. So let's just talk about generally. The target date fund works very well over a long term. But one of the challenges, one of the criticisms of target dates, it really only uses age, right, to define your asset allocation. So more equity heavy in your early years. As you get close to retirement, they add additional more fixed income options, take some of that risk away. as you get close to retirement. And that has worked really, really well. What we're seeing people innovate now, and certainly Principal's one of the people that are coming up with these innovations, is a more personalized target date that uses factors in addition to age. And so we can look at the reg data we have. If you've got a defined benefit, if you've got a lifetime annuity already, your exposure to equities can be higher than somebody who may not have a guaranteed income option. So there's a way to personalize that. And the same thing happens in a managed account. It's able to have an advisor that sort of looks at you, your personal circumstances, your personal needs for income, or what your own financial goals and obligations are, and being able to tailor an asset allocation for you. The interesting thing you're seeing in target date now is you're also seeing what people are calling hybrid target dates, right? Target date fund until you reach the age of 40 or 45 or 50, and then it converts to a managed account option. So you have an asset accumulation for 20, 25 years. But then when you get starting close to when you might need to start planning for retirement, it gets you into more personalized. It takes into account your individual circumstance as opposed to just your age. And I think that's been a really significant approach. Now, there is a cost difference to that. There is a cost for providing that advice. But in many cases, we see the people that pair up a target date fund with the managed account have better overall retirement income outcomes because that managed account is able to be personalized to their specific and unique circumstances.
Yeah, if I think about one of the historic sort of shortcomings of plan providers is this notion of that you have eyes on someone's defined contribution or 401k plan, but maybe not on their other assets. Maybe they have rental income from an apartment that they own. Maybe they have a lot of stock from the company that they work at, or maybe they have a lot of money in a taxable account. But so being able to have eyes on all their assets is really important as you think about building a plan that works for them.
Yeah, I think that's right, Bob. And I think what we're seeing in the workplace in particular is for a long time, people were okay with getting sort of retirement savings advice because they were really focused on accumulation. It was like, okay, how much should I be setting aside and how much should I save? And what we've seen with this wave of people that are retiring is, wait, now I'm ready to turn that accumulated savings into some sort of income for life. How do I think about that? How do I think about my asset allocation differently? And how do I think about it more holistically? So what we've seen is a switch in a demand from employers and employees around not just for retirement advice, but more holistic financial advice. Like, how do I handle my debt? How do I deal with dependent care, whether that's an adult child, a child with special needs, a parent? How do I handle all of these potential challenges that come my way in the course of life? And being able to provide more holistic advice than just, hey, how much should I save? How should I allocate my assets? That's great for accumulation. When it comes to actually the spend down or the decumulation phase of your lifetime, it's much more personalized and everybody's circumstances are so unique.
Yeah, increasingly it seems like plan sponsors are being noticed for having advice delivered in the workplace as sort of a cutting edge feature of 401k plans. Is that something that you sort of would recommend or see that the future is one in which we deliver personalized advice, boots on the ground, either in person or virtually by a human?
I think so, yes. And so I think there's been a change, certainly over the last 10 years, in terms of there was a period of time when plan sponsors would sort of say, we don't actually want you talking to our employees or giving them advice. We want you just sort of just do the record keeping and don't talk to them about the advice. The challenge there's a demand pull from employees that say, I need help. I want help. I need to feel more financially secure. Otherwise, I'm not going to be as productive in the workplace because I've got all of these challenges. And so we've really seen, probably starting in the large market first and then migrating down to smaller employers, is there is definitely a recognition by employers that their people need help, that they need to be able to provide them that help. Otherwise, they're going to be more distracted with their own personal situations and may actually leave the workplace. And so this demand is coming from employees and many more. I'm not sure I'd call it a cutting edge benefit. I think it's becoming much more common, I would say, in the large market first. But what generally tends to happen in the larger employers tends to migrate down over time. So I would expect to see those more advice offerings happening more broadly over the next several years.
So, Chris, you mentioned the word challenges. I think one of the challenges that people face when they're planning for retirement is this notion of competing demands. They may be paying down debt, a home equity line of credit, or student loans, or credit card debts, or auto loans, at the same time that they're saving for retirement. And it's always a interesting debate. Which should I pay down my debt or save for retirement? Both, a little of this or a little of that. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's really hard to provide a general rule on that just because everybody's circumstance is different. The interest rates that they may be charging, if it's heavy consumer debt, could cause you to want to pay down the debt faster than saving for retirement. There's a lot of factors that go into it. What I would say is it's really important for people to take a balanced approach to their financial wellness and not focus on any one particular goal, because if you've got debt, you've got to manage your debt. If you've got retirement savings, you've got to deal with that. And you've also got to save for potential future health care or dependent care obligations. So I think our view has generally been it's better for a person to seek the advice and get advice that they need because their circumstances are so individualized. But secondly, take a balanced approach and just don't focus on any one thing. We see in the past many people that have focused on, for example, saving heavily for college for their children, right? And that's their sole focus. And then when the children are out of the house in their mid to late 40s or early 50s, they start wondering, okay, now I've got to start saving for retirement. Well, by then, you've lost all the opportunity to save. You've lost the power of the time value of money, and it's really hard to catch up at that point, which is why, again, we believe a more balanced approach to dealing with debt, all of your obligations, and not postponing retirement, given the power of the time value of money over a long time, is really important.
Yeah. So you mentioned maybe one mistake that people make. Can you talk about other mistakes that people make and how they can avoid them or correct them?
Not taking advantage of the tax-free nature and the tax benefits that exist to them in their workplace retirement plans. We still see about roughly in the industry a little bit over 50% participation rates. It changes depending on the type of employer, but broadly. And so there certainly is a percentage of the population that just has a hard time meeting their daily activities. There's a lot of people that just aren't participating. And I think that challenge has been recognized, and it was recognized in the most recent legislation, the Secure 2.0 that was passed just a couple of years ago, to sort of now require mandatory enrollment in automatic enrollment in retirement plans as an employer-sponsored retirement plans. They can always default out if they want, but we've seen in our data, Bob, that when you're automatically enrolled in a plan, about 90% of the people stay in the plan. So you do have about a 10% that will opt out, but all of those things that we're learning about human behavior, but participating in the plans, taking advantage, even without the match, and the ability to save on a tax-deferred basis is powerful. And so, before you even talk about the ability to maximize an employer match. So we see a lot of people, 50%. People, maybe a little less than 50%, are not participating at all, and that's a challenge.
So, Chris, one of the questions that I think financial advisors get most commonly, especially from people who are on retirement's doorstep, is, am I financially ready for retirement? And oftentimes, if they don't have an advisor, maybe they're relying on some rule of thumb, like I need 10 to 12 times my salary set aside in my retirement nest egg to make sure that I can fund 30 years or 35 years of retirement. What's your thought on how folks ought to determine if they have enough?
Yeah, it's interesting. We recently conducted a survey where we had people expressing a great deal of confidence in their readiness for retirement. Over 60% expressed a comfort and a confidence in their retirement. But then when we asked them, how much do you think you'll need to save for retirement? They were way off in their recognition of. Well, I think we had over 60% of the people answered that they thought they needed 30 times their salary to save in retirement, which would be wonderful if you can do it. But the general industry standard, somewhere in the 10 to 12 range, is going to be sufficient when you add in the benefits of Social Security to be able to replace your income in retirement. So again, I think if people can get to 12 times their annual salary, they should be relatively comfortable. We try to encourage participants to find a way to try to save at least 15% of their pre-tax income, for retirement. That would include the employer match. So there's many people that can achieve that. And we've seen a number of people in our plans have been able to achieve that level. But it's difficult. Not everybody can get there.
Yeah. So in the second half of our show today, Chris, I want to talk about the living in retirement phase. But as you think about the planning for retirement, are there some things that we haven't touched on that you think would be important for people who are in that stage of life to think about?
I think the only thing I would touch on is that, oftentimes we're sitting here talking about it as though it's a financial exercise. And what we've learned pretty clearly, and certainly you've had guests that have talked about it as well, it's more than just a financial exercise. It's a change in life. It's a psychological, it's a social, it's an emotional. And oftentimes those factors get de-emphasized while people focus on the dollar amounts and the income without taking into account how your life changes when you decide to sort of go do something else. And we've certainly seen, and I think you've had other guests talk about, this increase in phased retirement. People are unretiring. People are coming back. They may not want the full 9-to-5 corporate job, but they are finding ways to find purpose and meaning in their day-to-day lives. You have the Japanese, notion of ikigai, right? What is their purpose? What is their meaning? What's going to give them that reason to wake up in the morning beyond just having enough money to live?
Yeah, it's so interesting when we talk to, you and other guests that we've had on the show. There's always this notion that people want to retire the term retirement because it doesn't mean what it used to, right? Because people have encore careers or second careers, or they're doing volunteer work or whatever the case may be, but it's not that classic image of sitting in a rocking chair reading the evening newspaper.
Or the two people sitting in on what looks like beach chairs on the graphic to your podcast, right? That's one view of retirement, but I think we found that most people, that may not necessarily be their picture of retirement, that they want to go do different things and find that sense of purpose and meaning.
Chris, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about living in retirement and some other things like Social Security and how to... Welcome back to Decoding Retirement. I'm speaking with Chris Littlefield. He is the president of Retirement Income Solutions at Principal. Chris, when we left off, I promised that we would talk about how people can protect their retirement savings against different kinds of risks that they might face in retirement, specifically inflation and longevity. Thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. You know, that is the seminal challenge for people to deal with the life cycle risks in retirement. I think, you know, I think there's no easy answers, but there's lots of different tools for people to use, whether they want to look at tips, Treasury with inflation protection. If they want to look at annuities, more and more annuity options are having some sort of cost of living adjustment in them. If they want to look at some sort of combination of equity and fixed income portfolio that helps, you know, equities can help fight the impacts of inflation on their portfolios, assuming market returns are good. I think there's a lot. There's just that is the challenge, and staying exposed to equities, I think, is going to be important. I think the people that convert everything to a fixed income annuity with no adjustment, or everything to fixed income, I think that's really challenging over the long term. So again, I'd probably say a balanced approach, talking with your advisor about the different tools that are available for them to deal with inflation.
Yeah. So when you think about converting retirement savings into sustainable income, I think of it this way, that what you want is reliable income, sustainable income to maybe at least match, if nothing else, your essential expenses. And if you have more than enough, maybe you don't need more sustainable income. But can you talk a little bit about like how people should think about that question of converting assets into sustainable income?
Yeah, and that's the challenge that we have right now, right? Because we've done a fantastic job on accumulation for a lot of Americans. What we haven't done is train people how to turn an accumulated savings into lifetime income. I think, you know, again, I'm not a CFP. I think you're a CFP, Bob. But so, you know, I would say I think essential expenses are the start. But, you know, a lot of people might have dependent care obligations, obligations for a parent. There are a lot of factors that go into how much income they're going to need, and it really is highly individualized. I do believe that the industry is coming up with many more innovations about how to get people lifetime guaranteed income. Annuities is one. You know, we've had annuities and a safe harbor provision for in-plan annuities and retirement plans for a long time. The take-up is still not very high because of the fiduciary risks about plan sponsors having to pick one or a couple. But I do think that what you're seeing is you're starting to see them being built into target date funds. And I think that is the way that we're going to solve this problem. We're essentially recreating all the benefits of DB, automatic enrollment, professional investment advice, and lifetime distribution income in DC plans with auto enrollment, professional advice through target date funds. The last horizon that we haven't yet figured out and solved for Americans is how to convert their retirement savings into lifetime income.
Yeah. So last question. Everyone is talking about Social Security these days. And what role do you see it playing in someone's retirement income plan? And given the sort of the state of affairs with Social Security, how dependable do you think it will be for folks today and tomorrow?
Yeah. You know, I believe Social Security will be there. I think if you're at the beginning of your career, you might have a little bit more concern about what Social Security might look like in, 30, 40 years. But I think Social Security is a benefit that will be there for a long time. When we talk about Social Security going bankrupt, we're talking about Social Security Trust Fund. It's about 25% of the payments overall. So I think there's a lot of social need, and we do have a retirement crisis in the U.S. where people just haven't saved enough for retirement, and it's hard for me to imagine that there won't be some benefit there. But I think it's not wise to only rely on Social Security, particularly at higher income levels, because Social Security won't be enough to replace the income that you've experienced pre-retirement for people that at higher income levels. But I believe there's a lot of support for some sort of Social Security system. You might see things like means testing or other things come in as we get down over the next decade, as we get closer to the trust fund being depleted. But I think we believe Social Security will be around as a program for quite some time.
Yeah, you mentioned that Social Security is a smaller percentage of someone's retirement income if they're in a higher income quintile. And I think my research shows that somewhere around 15% is what Social Security represents in terms of retirement income for someone in an upper income category. So it's not a lot, but it's certainly not nothing either. So,
Right.
So, Chris, we've run out of time, unfortunately, and I want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with me and our viewers. It's so greatly appreciated, and we hope you'll come back on a future episode. We'll talk more about my favorite topic, retirement.
I would love to. Thank you, and thanks for this podcast, Bob. It's a great opportunity to talk about these issues.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. So that wraps up this episode of Decoding Retirement. We hope we provided you with some actionable advice to help you plan for or live in retirement. And don't forget, for the latest retirement news and expert analysis, check out yahoofinance.com.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.
Are you ready to master the markets and, dare I say, become a better leader in the process? Well, Yahoo Finance has you covered with our new full suite of original podcast content. Whether you're a seasoned investor or you're just starting your financial journey, we offer invaluable market insights and strategies to help boost your portfolio, build your wealth, and make you a successful investor. Podcast will make you a smarter investor.
Welcome to Stocks in Translation. I'm your host, Jared Blickery. Welcome to Financial Freestyle.
Hi, I'm Bob Powell, and welcome to Decoding Retirement. Welcome to Living Not So Fabulously.
Welcome to Trader Talk.
I'm Elizabeth Kaur. Welcome to The Big Idea.
Welcome to Yahoo Finance Sports Report.
Welcome to Word Money. I'm Patrick Murphy.
And I'm Dan Coons.
From Wall Street to Main Street to the C-Suite, we are your daily lifeline, because behind every great investor is Yahoo Finance. Join us on yahoofinance.com, the Yahoo Finance app, or work.
Oi. Uffa. Å, fy faen, som er sjukt å se på dette. Skal vi sette en short her? Jeg mente laderne. Det kommer rett ned her nå. Ja, det skal jo ned. Det er bare tullet her.
Welcome to Stocks in Translation, broadcasting from the New York Stock Exchange. I'm Jared Blickley, your host, and with me is the People's Voice, Sidney Freed. As always, please like, subscribe, and comment on Stocks in Translation on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, or YouTube. And today we are welcoming back Kevin Mon. He is the Hennion & Walsh President and Chief Investment Officer. And today we're going to be talking about market uncertainty, which has surged recently with all these tariff surprises. Our phrase of the day, flight to quality. Are government bonds and gold really the answer? And this episode is brought to you by the number 30.5%. That's how much the Mag 7 stocks are down collectively from those February all-time highs. So what's the future of the AI trade? And Kevin, let's just begin with your assessment of all the recent market volatility. It's been difficult to decipher. We have no idea what's coming next.
Yes.
How are you making sense of this and talking to clients about it?
Well, I guess they say that April showers bring May flowers, so let's hope this April tsunami at least brings some green shoots in the month of May. And I do see certain factors taking place during the month of April, if not April, perhaps during the second quarter, that could lead to a market rebound. First, any positive news with respect to trade or tariffs. Second, an extension of the tax cuts. Third, a potential rate cut. Yes, rate cut from the Federal Reserve later this quarter. And fourth, announcements during this earnings season that the spend taking place on AI is not slowing down and that defense spending is going to continue to increase. If those four things happen, you could see a rebound during the second quarter and perhaps a strong second half to the year.
All right, we're going to tackle all of those things, I hope. First, we want to get into our phrase of the day, which is flight to quality. This is when investors quickly move into safer assets like treasuries or gold during times of market stress, uncertainty, or fears of economic slowdown. But the point that I would like to make is treasuries haven't done so well recently. There's been this huge gyration, and so we saw rates shoot up, or actually shoot down, then they shot up, and it's been a whirlwind, not only in stocks but also bonds. Gold also got hit, so it's tough to stay in these positions sometimes. What do you tell clients?
Yeah, during periods of extreme volatility, we see correlations generally move to 1, where everything starts to sell off because people lose faith. What we saw last week, however, was that bonds actually held up relatively well. We saw municipal bonds rise by about 2%. We saw treasury bonds and investment-grade corporate bonds hold up their strength as well as the stock market sold off. However, everything changed this week.
Yes.
Over the last 2 days now, we've seen yields spike. And there's a variety of factors that could be taking place. 1, are foreign governments selling U.S. treasuries? 2, are people now concerned with the economic slowdown and the Fed may need to raise interest rates? And 3, just overall volatility that's causing people to run to the sidelines or sell bonds to meet margin calls. I'm not sure which one of those factors is taking place, but I wouldn't anticipate this situation lasting much longer, and that flight to safety trade will come back if we have more and more volatility down the road.
So how do you play the bond market right now then?
It really is more of a question of what your objectives are. So if you're an income-oriented investor and you're looking for a reliable stream of income and principal protection on your investment when held to maturity, I can't think of a better place to look for those 2 solutions than bonds, generally investment-grade bonds. But if you're a high net worth investor, how about municipal bonds that will pay you tax-free income and have very attractive tax equivalent yields right now? On the other hand, if you're looking for growth, well, maybe you want to actually use this pullback as an attractive entry point to give you more growth by investing back into the stock market or adding more to the stock market. So it really does depend upon your objectives, your risk tolerance, and of course, your investment time frame.
I want to stick with bonds for a second. I get the whole cash flow thing, and that can be very valuable, especially as people approach retirement. But in the 2022 bear market, and I should say as of taping, we're not in a bear market just yet. We're flirting with that. But bonds did terribly. And so what a 60-40 portfolio had its worst 2 years in something like, I don't know if it was decades or 100 years, but it did not go well. Our bonds, is a 60-40, is that still a viable solution for investors?
I would argue that 60-40 is just as viable as 70-30, 80-20, or 90-10. Those are all arbitrary asset allocations. What took place in 2022, Jarrett, was that we saw a dramatic rise in short-term interest rates based upon the Federal Reserve looking to raise short-term interest rates. That obviously had a negative impact on bonds. What we're seeing now is really self-inflicted because of all the uncertainty around tariffs and trade, and now markets or investors fleeing the markets as a result. I still think bonds provide you with that diversification and income potential. And if you get these sell-offs and you are an income-oriented investor,
I think this creates an opportunity for them to consider.
Bonds do really confuse me.
Yeah.
Let's talk to the people's voice about bonds.
No, like all the different types, the municipal, investment grade, it is a little confusing.
Sure.
What's the number one thing someone should look for if they're hunting around for a bond? Is it duration? Like, what's the most important factor right now?
Or just a good RIA.
Yeah.
Advisor.
A good advisor who's a specialist in bonds or municipal bonds such as Hennion & Walsh. So if a bond is essentially a loan to a corporation, to a municipality, or to a government entity. They have an IOU to pay you back that loan over a set period of time with interest along the way. So you have to look at the credit quality of that third party that you're extending that loan to. So understand how the bond pays, what the credit quality of that entity is, and what type of coupon payment that you're getting over the life of that loan. The coupon never changes, but the yield changes as the price changes. As price goes up, yields come down. As price goes down, yields go up. But over the life of the investment, you can generally rely upon that coupon income and also for that bond to repay your principal at maturity.
So you get your money back at the end.
So you should get your money back at the end.
Yes, assuming no default. And in the case of the United States, we're not really too worried about that right now. I want to talk about the Fed, though, and this kind of ties into the bond market talk. We've been talking about 2022 as well. The Fed was fighting inflation there, and you mentioned that aggressive, it was an extremely aggressive rate hiking cycle. Arguably, we're not in the same predicament, but the Fed might be behind the 8 ball on inflation again. And even if we don't get a repeat of that, what's to say? Let's just talk the Fed in general. You said we might get a rate cut. That didn't even seem on the table 2 weeks ago, but things changed quickly in the wild, wild east here.
Well, if you look back to the last Fed meeting, right, at the end of March, they were still forecasting 2 rate cuts this year of 25 basis points each. I'm just suggesting that that first one may take place at the end of the second quarter, if in fact these tariffs have enough of a pronounced impact on the economy as some are suggesting. I believe the Fed is more concerned with this economic slowdown, potentially heading into a recession, than they are with inflation staying above 2%. However, if inflation starts to rise above 3% and gets closer to 3.5%, then they may have to sit on their hands or potentially consider a rate hike. We're not there just yet. In fact, I think these tariffs pose more of a growth scare than they do an inflation scare.
That's interesting. So what should we be looking for from the Fed? Is there terminology they'll signal to us that a rate cut is coming sooner than we expect?
Well, they don't meet in April, so the next time they meet is in May. And I think we heard from Chair Powell last week that they remain at the ready to step in if situations warrant. Again, that's Fed speak for we'll do something if we absolutely have to, but they're not there yet. And there's so much uncertainty about the tariffs themselves. Within the next 10 minutes, there could be an announcement about a country, a reciprocity, or a future trade engagement that they may have. So they're very reticent to commit to anything. But we're going to start to see the impact on GDP. We're going to start to see the impact on earnings and forward-looking earnings guidance. And that may cause the Fed to now stand up, pay more attention, and perhaps cut rates later this quarter.
Wait, so anything from earnings season, you're saying, that the Fed can
there's a good one.
Okay.
Let's talk about earnings.
Right now it's forecasted that earnings are going to grow 7% on a year-over-year basis. That could be too optimistic right now. If that holds, that would mark the 7th consecutive quarter of positive year-over-year earnings growth. But I'm more interested in earnings guidance. We heard from Walmart. Which is getting pulled. There's so much uncertainty right now, they can't actually forecast the next quarter, much less the balance of this year. So how much are they going to indicate that they're concerned about the longevity of these tariffs and the potential impact on revenues and earnings for these companies? So I think that's the biggest question mark for me coming out of this earnings season. And unfortunately, we may not get a lot of guidance from them because they don't know.
Well, and this reminds me of the pandemic. When we saw guidance getting pulled, first of all, I'll say companies don't want to pull guidance because their stock tends to get whacked when they do that. But if there are mitigating circumstances, what usually happens, you get a few big players who do it and then everybody else follows. So with Walmart doing it, and that happened very recently versus this taping, I wouldn't be surprised if we kind of see the pile on there. But then you see all those, that 7.5% earnings growth.
Yep.
Does that go negative potentially? I mean, what happens with that?
I don't think it's going to have as much of an impact on first quarter earnings as the tariffs weren't even in place at that point in time. But in terms of forward-looking guidance and the earnings estimate for Q2 and the balance of this year,
that's what I was talking about.
Revised downward. And what does that create the potential for? Well, once some of this tariff malaise gets lifted, which I think will take place in some way, shape, or form during the second quarter, now you can see these companies actually beat those revised downward earnings estimates and provide another tailwind for the markets.
Side note, should you be allowed to pull your guidance? I feel like it's like
well, it's optional in the first place.
But it's like if you can't have me at my best, you can't have me at my worst. Like if you're only giving guidance when things are good, doesn't that defeat the purpose of like issuing guidance?
People's voice for chair of the SEC.
Come on. You want to play by my rules. What do you think?
I think at the end of the day, what it's really telling me as a professional investor who's doing this for over 3 decades is that even the CEOs of major companies don't know what to expect right now. And they're willing to put up their hands and saying, we can't even provide guidance right now. We need more information before we feel comfortable providing guidance. Whether they should be able to do that or not, I'll leave that up to you to decide as the next chair of the SEC.
No,
but they can and they are, and that's what it's suggesting to me. They don't know, they don't have a crystal ball. I certainly don't have a crystal ball, but I do think there is light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully that light isn't an oncoming train.
About a minute to break here. Tax cuts. We haven't talked about those yet. That's just kind of sitting in the back pocket there. That could be a bullish catalyst once tariffs are over. But how do you think this plays out?
I think we're starting to hear the ramifications of that already. Some discussions taking place with the Republicans around the extension of the tax cuts. Look, if those tax cuts don't get extended, that is a deal breaker. That's a game changer. And the market can't withstand that type of outcome right now. So there could be some additional back and forth. And perhaps Trump will use these tariffs as a negotiating tool with respect to getting what he wants on additional tax cuts that he's proposed. But I think at some point in time in the second quarter, at least the original existing tax cuts get extended. And that's a tailwind for the markets.
All right, we have to take a quick break here, but coming up, we're going to be talking the AI trade. Is it still viable? Along with 2 fashion icons strutting down the runway in our...
Har det blitt en bra tredjedag? Ja, det har gått opp 5% i dag. Og så satte vi en short før close, eller på close, og så kom det opp nå med Trump som pratet. Så jeg satte 2 nye short nå, så får se. Det er opp 5% da, i dag. Nå er faen meg klokka snart 3. Jeg må legge meg sikkert snart. Jeg skal opp om 4 timer.
We are back, and this episode is brought to you by the number 30.5%. That's how much the Mag 7 stocks are down, I believe, from those February highs. Many of these stocks were the pillar of the AI trade. You think NVIDIA, you think the hyperscalers from Alphabet to Microsoft. Is this trade still alive? Is there any future tailwind here? Because it's been a huge drag on the market so far this year.
Is the Mag 7 trade still alive or AI?
AI. Let's say AI.
Let's start with AI. So I believe that the AI revolution is in fact alive and well. If I can use a baseball analogy, as I believe I did the last time I was on air with you, I believe we're still in batting practice of a doubleheader. Now, there's been a lot of questions thrown at that baseball game over the course of the past few months. Are companies spending too much on AI? Can they withstand and continue at that high rate of spend with respect to the AI infrastructure? And how much will the supply chain be disrupted by these tariffs? But then I go back to the actual companies involved, and we continue to see announcements with tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars being invested in AI infrastructure, whether it's NVIDIA with their data centers, whether it's the government with respect to the Stargate project, whether it's Alphabet investing in their own power solutions for their data centers. These companies aren't slowing down.
Do you think there's some kind of threshold that makes them slow down? Like the rubber meets the road, tariffs are too bad, suddenly earnings are in doubt, and Facebook, Facebook has had some aggressive moves in the past. Their stock gets cut 75%, then it's up 200%. Yeah. Do we see some move like that strategically?
I think the bigger risk is to underinvestment in AI infrastructure as opposed to overinvestment, because it's going to be very difficult to play catch up with respect to artificial intelligence, and these companies appreciate it. And now it's becoming a geographical battle as well with respect to the supply chain elements with China and domestically here as well as it relates to semiconductors and chips. So I don't think we're going to reach that point where these companies say, you know what, AI is no longer a transformative technology, we don't need to be a part of it. They may look to invest more strategically and through more joint ventures and partnerships, but I don't think they're going to abandon it completely, at least not at this point.
So what should investors be watching for in the next in Q1 earnings season from these AI companies? What should they be looking to hear to kind of bolster those expectations, make them more confident?
Sure, not to make this only a conversation about NVIDIA, but let's do it anyway, because it's always fun, right? So later on in the quarter, we'll get the announcement from NVIDIA about their earnings and about their revenues and their forward-looking guidance. What I'm keenly interested in is how much their data center business has grown. Not necessarily the semiconductor and chip sorts. We know they're a leader in that capacity, but they continue to invest more and more in data centers, the nerve center of all these AI algorithms, giving them diversified revenue streams. If they see more growth in that area of their business, that's good for the whole AI revolution, because that's not limited to just NVIDIA chips. It's related to that one-stop shopping solution for everything AI that NVIDIA is trying to supply. So I'm very interested. I know it's going to take some time until they report, but I'm very keenly interested in seeing what they report on their data center business.
What about the side bets in AI? We saw utilities explode, and that was when there just was not enough electricity to be had. And I'm thinking with this downturn, maybe there is a surplus of electricity, so maybe that's not the trade. But we also have these bolt-on AI acquisition trades by some of the SaaS plays, some of those software companies incorporating AI into their rundown, like Salesforce, for instance. How, any of those plays, do you see that coming down the pike this year, or is that farther off in the distance now?
Utilities is still my favorite sector for 2025. They are a backdoor play into the AI revolution. They do provide defensive characteristics during periods of volatility, as we're seeing, and they generally pay a high level of dividend income. And if interest rates continue to come down, even if marginally over the next couple of years, utility stocks that pay dividends will be attractive. So I believe there is powerful potential in the power solutions that are necessary for AI. Where do they come from? Utilities. All these data centers can't manufacture their own power, at least not yet, so they have to turn to the utility of the states that they operate within, whether it's natural gas, traditional electricity, or even nuclear power. And companies like DTE Energy, Duke Energy, they not only supply natural gas, but they supply nuclear capabilities that these data centers can plug into. So I wouldn't give up on the utility trade just yet. In fact, I think it's got more room to run.
Any AI plays you would buy the dip in right now besides utilities, perhaps?
Or even quantum
Or even
stocks. Or that just out there in space.
I still like the cooling solutions that are necessary. We know data centers require tremendous amounts of electricity and power, but they also run very hot. So we heard names last year like Vertiv. We heard names like Modine Manufacturing, Trane Technologies, or even Comfort System. They supply the HVAC and cooling solutions to warehouses and data centers. They've sold off during this market pullback as well. I think there's very attractive entry points as those cooling solutions don't go away just because there's more market volatility. The data centers need them. So I think that's an area of the market that you could expect to see a rebound in addition to the semiconductor and chips, certain the data centers, and then some of the software and hardware plays too.
Did we talk Mag 7? Did you say if you
A
thought
little
that was
bit,
dead?
a little bit.
A little bit.
Well, we
Is it
talked
dead?
hyperscalers, but Mag 7 is this broad umbrella. We didn't talk Tesla at all.
Yeah. Well, if we separate Tesla from the Mag 7, then we have a discussion on AI and technology. When you bring Tesla into it, now we're talking about automobiles, tariffs,
Da legger man meg.
Amazon.
Gjør ikke så veldig mye mer. Sitter rolig. Det er short
Amazon, Microsoft. I still think
Pluss frem og tilbake med den siste shorten med pluss-minus gevinst. Ikke gjør noen ting.
More than just one winner, but they just
Da
got
tror
to
jeg
the
bare
party so
støy.
quickly,
Samme som i dag
and they
tidlig.
continue to invest, and they
Og fordi
continue to
Trump
look at
ikke klarer å holde
partnerships in
kjeften
that
sin.
regard. So as
Så
much
da
as
er
I
på om
want
3
the other
timer.
493
Da ses vi
non-magnificent
om
stocks to start taking
ikke
over
altfor lenge.
leadership of this rally,
Sov godt.
we can't have this bull market rally continue if we don't hit bear market territory without those 7 magnificent